Maria stood frozen, her world shattering as the lawyer's words echoed in the opulent study. The secret will, hidden for years, left her with nothing. Her beloved husband, William, the man who promised her the American dream, had betrayed her in death as he had in life. Shock gave way to anger as she gazed at the smug faces of his family, their disdain for the Filipina bride no longer veiled by false politeness. They thought her naive, a simpleton easily discarded. They were wrong. In that moment, Maria's love transformed into a burning desire for justice and revenge. She would uncover every dirty secret, every hidden lie in William's carefully constructed facade. From boardrooms to bedrooms, no stone would be left unturned. The perfect marriage was a sham, but Maria was far from defeated. She'd come too far, sacrificed too much to be cast aside. With steely determination, she vowed to turn the tables on those who underestimated her. William's hidden life would be exposed, and everything he sought to keep from her would become hers. The loving bride was gone, replaced by a woman scorned and ready to fight. Her shocking revenge would leave the family stunned, their empire crumbling at her feet. Buckle up, get ready, and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. The bustling streets of Manila pulsed with life as Maria hurried to the hospital, her crisp white uniform a stark contrast against the vibrant colors of the city. She navigated the crowded sidewalks with practiced ease, her mind already on the day ahead. At 28, Maria was one of the most dedicated nurses at San Lazaro Hospital, her compassion and skill earning her the respect of both patients and colleagues. As she entered the hospital, the familiar antiseptic smell greeted her, a scent that had become as comforting as it was clinical. Maria checked in at the nurses' station, exchanging quick greetings with her co-workers before diving into her rounds. The day flew by in a whirlwind of medication schedules, patient checkups, and the occasional emergency. During a rare, quiet moment, Maria found herself staring out the window of the break room, her coffee growing cold in her hands. The Manila skyline stretched before her, a mix of old and new, much like the country itself. She loved her job, loved helping people, but a part of her yearned for something more. The stories she heard from patients who had traveled the world, or from Filipino nurses who had worked abroad, ignited a spark of wanderlust in her heart. Daydreaming again, Maria, the gentle, teasing voice of her friend and fellow nurse Lina broke through her reverie. Maria turned, a sheepish smile on her face. "Is it that obvious?" Lina laughed, joining her at the window. "Only to those who know you well. Let me guess, you're imagining yourself in some glamorous city living the high life." "Not exactly," Maria replied, her eyes drifting back to the view. "I just wonder sometimes what it would be like to experience more of the world, to make a difference on a larger scale." Lena's expression softened. "You already make a huge difference here, Maria, but I understand. We all have dreams." The conversation was cut short as their pages beeped simultaneously, calling them back to duty. As Maria rushed to respond, she pushed her dreams to the back of her mind, focusing on the immediate needs of her patients. Days turned into weeks, and Maria's life continued in its familiar rhythm: work, home, sleep, repeat. She found joy in her routine, in the small victories of helping patients recover, in the camaraderie with her co-workers. But the whisper of something more, something different, never quite faded. It was on a particularly hectic day that fate decided to intervene. Maria had just finished a grueling double shift, her feet aching and her mind foggy with exhaustion. As she left the hospital, the early morning sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. Lost in thought, Maria didn't notice the man until she collided with him, her bag slipping from her shoulder and spilling its contents across the sidewalk. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, dropping to her knees to gather her scattered belongings. "No, please. The fault was entirely mine," a deep, accented voice replied. Maria looked up to see a tall, distinguished-looking man kneeling beside her, helping to collect her things. His salt and pepper hair and tailored suit spoke of wealth and sophistication, but there was a kindness in his blue eyes that immediately put her at ease. "I'm William," he said, handing her the last of her items. "I'm William Fairfax. And you are?" "Maria," she replied, suddenly aware of her rumpled uniform and messy hair. "Maria Santos." William smiled, and Maria felt her heart skip a beat. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Maria. I couldn't help but notice your uniform. Are you a nurse?" Maria nodded, pride creeping into her voice despite her fatigue. "Yes, I just finished a double shift." "Impressive," William said. his admiration evident. "I've always had the utmost respect for those in the medical profession. Your dedication is truly commendable." They stood there for a moment, an unexpected connection forming in the early morning light. William glanced at his watch and sighed. "I'm afraid I have a meeting to attend, but I'd love to continue our conversation. Would you perhaps be free for coffee later?" Maria hesitated, surprised by the offer. It wasn't every day that a handsome, successful-looking foreigner asked her out, but there was something about William that intrigued her, a sense of possibility that she couldn't ignore. "I'd like that," she found herself saying. They exchanged numbers, and William promised to call her later to arrange the details. As Maria watched him walk away, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change. Little did she know just how profound that change would be. The coffee date turned into dinner, and dinner turned into a whirlwind romance that swept Maria off her feet. William, she learned, was a successful American businessman who frequently traveled to the Philippines for work. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in every aspect of her life. For the first time, Maria's dreams of seeing the world beyond Manila seemed within reach. William regaled her with stories of his travels, painting vivid pictures of bustling New York, romantic Paris, and exotic Tokyo. With each tale, Maria felt her heart opening not just to William, but to the possibilities he represented. Their courtship was a fairy tale come to life. William showered her with gifts and attention, taking her to the finest restaurants in Manila and introducing her to a world of luxury she had only ever imagined. But what touched Maria most was the way he listened to her, valued her opinions, and encouraged her ambitions. "You have so much potential, Maria," he would say, his eyes shining with admiration. "The world needs more people like you, with your compassion and drive." As the weeks turned into months, Maria found herself falling deeply in love. William's business trips became more frequent, and each departure grew more difficult. It was during one of these separations that Maria realized she couldn't imagine her life without him. When William returned from his latest trip, there was an air of nervous excitement about him. He took Maria to dinner at the same restaurant where they had their first date, and as the Manila skyline twinkled beyond the windows, he got down on one knee. "Maria Santos," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "you've brought a light into my life that I never knew was missing. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy streamed down Maria's face as she nodded too. Overwhelmed to speak, the ring William slipped onto her finger was more beautiful than anything she had ever seen, a diamond that caught the light and seemed to hold all the promises of their future within its facets. As they embraced, the restaurant erupting in applause around them, Maria felt as though she was living in a dream. She, a simple nurse from Manila, was engaged to a wealthy American businessman. It was more than a fairy tale. It was the beginning of a new life, full of love and endless possibilities. The weeks that followed were a flurry of activity. There were calls to be made, papers to be filed, and 1,000 details to arrange. Maria's head spun with visa applications, travel arrangements, and the bittersweet task of saying goodbye to the only home she had ever known. Her colleagues at the hospital were a mix of excitement and concern. Many congratulated her, thrilled at her good fortune. Others, like Lena, couldn't hide their worry. "It's all happening so fast, Maria," Lena said one day as they shared lunch in the hospital cafeteria. "Are you sure about this?" Maria reached across the table, squeezing her friend's hand. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Lena. William is everything I've ever dreamed of and more. This is my chance at a new life, a chance to see the world and make a difference on a larger scale." Lena's eyes softened, but the concern didn't entirely leave her face. "I just want you to be happy and safe. Promise me you'll stay in touch." "Of course," Maria assured her. "You're my best friend. No matter where life takes me, that won't change." Dunes, as the day of her departure drew near, Maria found herself torn between excitement and nostalgia. She walked the streets of Manila, committing every sight, sound, and smell to memory. The city that had been her whole world for 28 years was about to become a cherished memory. The night before her flight, Maria's family threw her a despedida, a going-away party filled with laughter, tears, and promises to visit. As she looked around at the faces of her loved ones, Maria felt a momentary all this behind. But then she thought of William, of the love in his eyes when he looked at her, of the future they would build together. Her resolve strengthened. This wasn't an ending, she told herself. It was a beginning. The next morning, with her family gathered at the airport to see her off, Maria took her first steps towards her new life. As the plane lifted off, off, Manila growing smaller beneath her. She pressed her hand against the window, whispering a silent goodbye to the city that had shaped her. Hours later, as the plane began its descent into New York, Maria's heart raced with anticipation. The skyline came into view, a forest of skyscrapers reaching towards the clouds, more immense and awe-inspiring than she had ever imagined. This was to be her new home, a city of dreams and limitless opportunities. William was waiting for her at the arrivals gate, a bouquet of roses in his hands and a smile that outshone even the dazzling lights of the city. As Maria fell into his embrace, inhaling the familiar scent of his cologne, she knew she had made the right choice. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. "Welcome home, my love," William murmured into her hair. And in that moment, with the bustle of the airport around them and the promise of a new life ahead, Maria truly felt that she was home. The weeks following Maria's arrival in New York passed in a whirlwind of activity. William's penthouse apartment, with its panoramic views of Central Park, became her new home. Each morning, she would wake up to the sight of the sun rising over the city's skyline, still hardly believing that this was now her reality. William, ever the attentive fiancé, took time off work to show Maria around the city. They explored the bustling streets of Manhattan, visited world-renowned museums, and dined at exclusive restaurants. Maria's eyes were wide with wonder at every turn, drinking in the sights and sounds of a world so different from the one she had left behind. "What do you think?" William asked one evening as they strolled hand in hand through Central Park, the city lights twinkling around them. Maria smiled up at him, her heart full. "It's more than I ever dreamed of, William. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "This is just the beginning, my love. I promise to give you the world." As the days went by, Maria began to settle into her new life. She decorated their home, adding personal touches that blended her Filipino heritage with the sleek modernity of New York. William encouraged her to explore her interests, and she found herself enrolling in art classes and volunteering at a local hospital, eager to keep her nursing skills sharp. But amidst the excitement and glamour of her new life, Maria couldn't help but feel a growing undercurrent of unease. It started small, almost imperceptible, like a pebble in her shoe that she couldn't quite shake out. The first hint came during a dinner party William hosted for some of his business associates. Maria had spent the day preparing, determined to make a good impression. As the guests arrived, she greeted them with warm smiles and gracious hospitality, just as her mother had taught her back in Manila. "William, your fiancé is absolutely charming," one of the men commented, his eyes raking over Maria in a way that made her skin crawl. "Where did you say you found her again?" William laughed, a sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. Now, Charles, Maria isn't some exotic trinket I picked up on my travels. She's a highly skilled nurse and the love of my life." The conversation moved on, but Maria couldn't shake the feeling of being scrutinized, as if she were an oddity on display. She caught whispers and sidelong glances throughout the evening, fragments of conversations that made her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. "Mail order bride," she heard one woman mutter behind her champagne glass. "I give it a year," another replied with a smirk. Maria held her head high, determined not to let their words affect her. But as the night wore on, she found herself retreating to the kitchen more and more, using the excuse of refilling drinks to escape the judgmental gazes. When the last guest had finally left, Maria sagged against the closed door, exhaustion and hurt washing over her. "You were wonderful tonight," William said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "They loved you." Maria wanted to believe him, wanted to lose herself in his embrace and forget the cruel words and looks, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and she couldn't help but wonder if this was a sign of things to come. As the weeks turned into months, Maria found herself facing more and more of these subtle slights and microaggressions. Whether it was at charity galas, business dinners, or even casual brunches with William's friends, she tried to talk to William about it, to express her discomfort and hurt, but he always seemed to brush it off, assuring her that she was imagining things or that people just needed time to get to know her. "You're being too sensitive, darling," he'd say, patting her hand. "These things take time. You'll fit in before you know it." But fitting in seemed an increasingly impossible task. The more Maria tried to adapt to this new world of high society, the more she felt like she was losing herself. She missed the warmth and openness of her life in Manila, the easy camaraderie she had shared with her co-workers and friends. One afternoon, feeling particularly homesick, Maria decided to prepare sinigang, a sour soup that had always been her comfort food back home. As the familiar aroma filled the apartment, she felt a wave of nostalgia wash over her. William came home early that day, his nose wrinkling as he entered the kitchen. "What's that smell?" he asked, a note of displeasure in his voice. "It's sinigang," Maria replied, her smile faltering at his reaction. "I thought we could have a taste of home for dinner." William's expression softened, but there was still a hint of something in his eyes that Maria couldn't quite place. Disappointment? Embarrassment? "That's thoughtful of you, dear, but I'm afraid I have to rain check. I forgot to mention we have dinner reservations at Le Bernardin tonight. One of my biggest clients is in town." Maria's heart sank. "Oh, I see. I'll just put this away then. Why don't you have the housekeeper take care of it?" William suggested, already loosening his tie as he headed for the bedroom. "You should start getting ready. Wear that blue Dior I bought you last week. It'll make a good impression." As Maria watched William disappear down the hallway, she felt a lump form in her throat. She looked down at the pot of sinigang, the meal she had poured her heart into, and suddenly felt very small and very far from home. Despite these moments of doubt and discomfort, Maria was determined to make her new life work. She threw herself into wedding preparations, hoping that once she and William were officially married, things would improve. She wanted to prove to everyone, including herself, that she belonged in this world. The wedding planning became Maria's focus, a welcome distraction from her growing unease. She pored over bridal magazines, consulted with top wedding planners, and spent hours choosing every detail, from the flowers to the music. William seemed happy to let her take the lead, only stepping in when it came to the guest list and some of the more extravagant expenses. "Nothing but the best for my bride," he would say, signing off on costs that made Maria's head spin. As the big day approached, Maria's excitement was tinged with a growing anxiety. The guest list was filled with names she didn't recognize, New York elites and business magnates that were part of William's world, but strangers to her. Her own family and friends from Manila were noticeably few, many unable to make the long and expensive trip. The night before the wedding, Maria found herself standing in front of the full-length mirror in their bedroom, her wedding dress a confection of silk and lace that cost more than she had ever imagined spending on a single item of clothing. She looked every inch the bride of a wealthy businessman, but as she stared at her reflection, she barely recognized herself. "You look stunning," William said, appearing in the doorway. His eyes roamed over her appreciatively. "Tomorrow you'll be the envy of every woman in New York." Maria forced a smile, pushing down the flutter of unease in her stomach. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? A life of luxury, a devoted husband, a chance to see the world. So why did she feel so out of place? The wedding day dawned bright and clear, a perfect New York spring day. The ceremony was held in St. Patrick's Cathedral, its Gothic spires reaching towards a cloudless sky. As Maria walked down the aisle, the eyes of New York's elite upon her, she felt like an actress in a play, going through the motions of a role she wasn't quite sure how to inhabit. But when she reached William and saw the love shining in his eyes, her doubts receded. This was the man she loved, the man who had given her a new life full of possibilities. As they exchanged vows, Maria felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would make this work, would prove to everyone that she belonged here. The reception was held at the Plaza Hotel, a lavish affair that seemed to Maria more like a business networking event than a celebration of love. She smiled and nodded her way through countless introductions, her cheeks aching from the effort of maintaining a constant, gracious expression. It was during a rare moment alone, having excused herself to the powder room, that Maria overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "I have to hand it to William," from one of the stalls. "He's got quite the eye for investments. That little Filipino nurse is going to be great for his image." so charitable, so worldly. Another voice chimed in with a laugh. Please, we all know why he really married her. Younger women are always good for business, and exotic ones even better. Maria's hands shook as she gripped the edge of the marble sink, willing herself not to cry, not to smudge her carefully applied makeup. These women didn't know her, didn't know William. Their words were just bitter gossip, nothing more. But as she rejoined the party, plastering on a smile and taking her place beside William, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she had just glimpsed a truth she wasn't ready to face. The weeks following the wedding brought little respite from Maria's growing sense of isolation. William threw himself back into work with renewed vigor, often leaving early and returning late. When he was home, he was distracted, his mind clearly still on business dealings and market fluctuations. Maria tried to fill her days with meaningful activities. She continued her volunteer work at the hospital, finding comfort in the familiar routines of patient care. She took more art classes, her paintings becoming an outlet for the emotions she couldn't express in words. But no matter how busy she kept herself, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she was living in a gilded cage. The penthouse that had once seemed like a fairy tale now felt confining, its luxurious furnishings a constant reminder of a world she wasn't sure she belonged in. One evening, after another silent dinner with William buried in his phone, Maria decided to broach the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "William," she said softly, reaching across the table to touch his hand, "I've been thinking I'd like to go back to work as a nurse. There's a position open at Mount Sinai, and I think—" William looked up from his phone, his brow furrowed. "Work? But darling, you don't need to work. I provide everything you could possibly want." Maria took a deep breath, steeling herself. "It's not about needing to work, William. I want to. I miss nursing, miss feeling like I'm making a difference." William's expression softened, but there was a patronizing edge to his smile that made Maria's heart sink. "I understand you're feeling a bit restless, love. Why don't we plan a trip? Paris, maybe, or Tokyo. You've always wanted to see Japan." "That's not what I'm saying," Maria persisted, frustration creeping into her voice. "I want to have a purpose. Here, beyond being your wife." William's phone buzzed, and his attention immediately snapped back to the screen. "We'll discuss this later, all right? I have to take this call. It's important." As William strode out of the room, already speaking rapidly into his phone, Maria felt a wave of loneliness wash over her. She was surrounded by luxury, married to a man who claimed to love her, and yet she had never felt more alone. The next few months saw a subtle shift in William's behavior. He became more controlling, questioning Maria's every move and decision. Her volunteer work at the hospital was suddenly taking too much of her time. Her art classes were a frivolous expense. Even her phone calls to family and friends in Manila were met with thinly veiled disapproval. "You're my wife now," William would say, his tone a mixture of possessiveness and pride. "You don't need to hold on to your old life. This is your world now." But it didn't feel like her world. It felt like a performance, a role she was increasingly struggling to play. The warmth and passion that had characterized their early relationship was fading, replaced by a cool distance that Maria didn't know how to bridge. It was at a charity gala, nearly a year into their marriage, that Maria's world began to truly unravel. She was standing alone by the bar, taking a moment to catch her breath after another round of stilted small talk, when she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "Did you hear about William Fairfax?" A man's voice drifted over, slightly slurred from too much champagne. "Apparently, he's been making some very interesting moves in Southeast Asia." "Oh," another voice replied, intrigued. "Do tell." "Word is, he's been buying up land, lots of it, poor areas, places ripe for development. And get this, he's using shell companies to do it." Very hush-hush. Maria's heart began to race. She knew William had business interests in the Philippines, but he had always been vague about the details. Could this be why? "But here's the kicker," the first man continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Rumor has it, he's not just developing, he's displacing whole communities forced out of their homes, and with that pretty little Filipino wife of his who's going to question his motives." The glass in Maria's hand slipped, shattering on the marble floor. Of concern and annoyance directed her way, but Maria barely noticed. Her mind was reeling, pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even known existed suddenly falling into place. William appeared at her side, all solicitous concern. "Are you all right, darling? You look pale." Maria looked up at her her husband, really looked at him, and for the first time she wondered if she knew him at all. "I'm fine," she heard herself say, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. "Just a little tired. Would you mind if we went home?" As they left the gala, William's hand possessive on the small of her back, Maria felt a resolve hardening within her. She had come to America for love, for a chance at a better life, but at what cost? And more importantly, at whose expense? For the first time since she had arrived in New York, Maria felt a clarity of purpose. She would get to the bottom of this, would uncover the truth about William's business dealings, and if what she feared was true, she would find a way to make it right. As their car glided through the neon-lit streets of New York, Maria stared. Out the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. The woman who looked back at her was no longer the wide-eyed nurse from Manila. She was someone new, someone determined. The fairy tale was over. Now, the real story was about to begin. The days following the charity gala passed in a blur of forced normalcy for Maria. She maintained her routine, smiling at William over breakfast, kissing him goodbye as he left for work, but inside, her mind was racing. The conversation she had, overheard, played on repeat in her thoughts, each word etching itself deeper into her consciousness. She began to pay closer attention to William's behavior, noting the way he would step out of rooms to take phone calls, how he would quickly close his laptop when she entered his study. Little things that she had once dismissed as the natural. Secrecy of a busy businessman now took on a sinister air. One evening, as William worked late in his study, Maria decided to take action. She waited until she heard the shower running, then slipped into the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had only a few minutes before William would emerge, freshly showered and ready for bed. Maria's eyes scanned the meticulously organized desk, searching for anything out of place. A stack of papers caught her attention, the letterhead, bearing the name of a company she didn't recognize. As she leafed through the documents, her breath caught in her throat. There, in black and white, were plans for a massive development project in a poor coastal area of the Philippines, an area she recognized from her childhood. The sound of the shower turning off jolted Maria back to reality. She quickly replaced the papers, her hands shaking as she tried to arrange them exactly as she had found them. She had just closed the study door behind her when William emerged from the bathroom, a towel wrapped around his waist. "Everything all right, darling?" he asked, noticing her flushed cheeks. Maria forced a smile. "Just feeling a bit warm. I think I'll open a window in the bedroom." That night, as William slept peacefully beside her, Maria lay awake, her mind churning. The development plans she had seen were vague, but she knew enough about the area to understand the implications. If the project went through, hundreds, maybe thousands of people would be displaced from their homes. In the days that followed, Maria began her own covert investigation. She spent hours online, researching William's company and its subsidiaries, trying to piece together the extent of his operations in the Philippines. She reached out to old contacts from home, asking carefully worded questions about new development projects in their areas. The more she uncovered, the more her heart sank. It seemed that William's business interests in her homeland were far more extensive and ruthless than she had ever imagined. Companies linked to him were buying up land at suspiciously low prices, often in areas where local officials were rumored to be corrupt. Maria felt torn. On one hand, she loved William, or at least she loved the man she thought he was. He had given her a life of luxury and opportunity that she had never dreamed possible. But on the other hand, she couldn't ignore the growing evidence of his unethical business practices that were harming her own people. As weeks passed, Maria found it increasingly difficult to maintain her facade of the happy, carefree wife. She became quieter, more withdrawn, her smiles no longer reaching her eyes. William noticed the change, his concerns manifesting as increased attempts to shower her with gifts and attention. "You seem distracted lately, my love," he said one evening as they sat on the terrace, the New York skyline glittering before them. "Is everything all right?" Maria looked at him, studying the face she had once found so charming, so trustworthy. Stress around his eyes, the set of his jaw that spoke of hidden tensions. "I'm fine," she lied, hating herself for the deception, "just a bit homesick." homesick, I suppose. William's expression softened. Oh, darling, I know it's been hard for you being so far from your family. Why don't we plan a trip back to Manila soon? We could combine it with some business I need to handle there. The mention of business in Manila sent a chill down Maria's spine. She forced a smile. That would be lovely. I'd like that. As William launched into potential travel dates and itineraries, Maria's mind was elsewhere. A trip to the Philippines could be exactly what she needed, not to assuage her homesickness, but to investigate William's dealings firsthand. The opportunity to return to Manila came sooner than Maria had anticipated. Barely a month after their conversation on the terrace, William announced that he needed to make an urgent business trip to the Philippines. It's a shame it's such short notice, he said as they packed their suitcases. But this deal could be a game changer for the company, and I thought you'd be excited for a visit home. Maria nodded, carefully folding a dress into her luggage. Of course, it'll be wonderful to see everyone. The flight to Manila was long, giving Maria ample time to think and plan. She knew she would need to be careful to balance her time between family visits and her own clandestine fact-finding mission. As the plane touched down at Ninoy Aquino International Airport, Maria felt a mix of emotions, her love for her homeland, warring with the anxiety of what she might uncover. The first few days of their trip were a whirlwind of family reunions and official business meetings. Maria played her part as the dutiful wife, accompanying William to dinners with local officials and business partners. But all the while, she was watching, listening, gathering bits of information like pieces of a complex puzzle. It was during one of these dinners that Maria overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. William was deep in discussion with a local politician, their voices low but not quite low enough. The residents are proving more stubborn than we anticipated, the politician was saying. But don't worry, we have ways of persuading them. A few well-placed threats, a little pressure on their livelihoods, and they'll see things our way. William's response was measured, but Maria could hear the steel beneath his words. I trust you to handle it, Congressman. Just remember, time is money. The longer this drags on, the less profitable it becomes for all of us. Maria excused herself from the table, her legs shaky as she made her way to the restroom. She splashed cold water on her face, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her seemed a stranger, far removed from the naive nurse who had fallen in love with a charming American businessman. Over the next few days, Maria made excuses to visit her old neighborhood, reconnecting with friends and former colleagues. She asked casual questions about new developments in the area, listening intently to stories of families being pressured to sell their land, of mysterious accidents befalling those who refused to cooperate. One afternoon, she managed to slip away to visit the coastal area she had seen in William's documents. What she found broke her heart. Where there had once been a thriving fishing village, there was now a construction site, bulldozers waiting, like patient predators to devour what remained of people's homes. An old woman approached her, noticing Maria's distress. It's a shame, isn't it? She said, her weathered face etched with sorrow. They say it's progress, but what good is progress if it destroys our way of life? Maria nodded, unable to speak. Past the lump in her throat, as she turned to leave, the old woman caught her arm. You're not from the company, are you? She asked, her eyes suddenly sharp. You look like you care. I do care, Maria replied, her voice barely above a whisper. More than you know. That night, as William slept soundly in their hotel suite, Maria made a decision. She could no longer stand by and watch as her husband's greed destroyed the lives of her countrymen. She had to act, had to find a way to stop this before it was too late. But how? She was just one woman, up against a powerful multinational corporation and corrupt local officials. The task seemed impossible, overwhelming. As dawn broke over Manila, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Maria felt a renewed sense of purpose. She might be just one woman, but she was a woman with knowledge, with connections both in the Philippines and back in New York. And most importantly, she was a woman with nothing left to lose. The return flight to New York was tense, with William engrossed in his work and Maria lost in her own thoughts. As they settled back into their penthouse, Maria knew that the luxury that surrounded her no longer felt like a dream come true. true, but like the price of her silence, her complicity. In the weeks that followed, Maria began to plan. She reached out to old friends from nursing school who now worked in journalism, sharing vague concerns about development projects displacing communities. She started volunteering at a legal aid clinic, ostensibly to keep her skills sharp, but really to learn more about corporate law and whistleblower protections. All the while, she maintained her facade as William's loving wife. She attended charity, Gallus on his arm, hosted dinner parties for his business associates, all while gathering information, building a case against the man she had once thought was her fairy tale prince. It was during one of these dinner parties that Maria's carefully constructed world began to crumble. She was in the kitchen, ostensibly checking on dessert, when she overheard two of William's colleagues talking in low voices. "William's really outdone himself this time," one man said, his words slightly slurred from too much wine. "That land deal in the Philippines is going to make us all rich if he can pull it off," the other replied. "I heard there's been some pushback from the locals. Messy business, that." The first man laughed, a sound that sent chills down Maria's spine. "That's why you marry a local, my friend. Great for the image, and it makes it harder for anyone to cry foul. William's always thinking 10 steps ahead." Maria's hands shook as she arranged petit fours on a silver tray. The words echoed in her mind, confirming her worst fears. Had her entire marriage been nothing but a business strategy, a way for William to deflect criticism and smooth over his unethical practices? As she rejoined the party, plastering on a smile and offering dessert to the guests, Maria felt something inside her harden. Any lingering doubts, any remaining feelings of love or loyalty towards William disappeared. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, as William left for work, Maria put her plan into action. She spent hours on the phone, speaking in hushed tones with journalists, lawyers, and old contacts from Manila. She compiled documents, cross-referenced financial records, and drafted a detailed account of everything she had seen and heard. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the penthouse, Maria heard the front door open. William's footsteps echoed through the apartment, growing closer. "Maria!" he called out. "Are you home, darling?" Maria took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. She closed her laptop, hiding the evidence of her day's work. "In here," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. William appeared in the doorway of their bedroom, his suit jacket slung over one shoulder, his tie loosened. He looked tired, Maria noticed, the lines around his eyes more pronounced than usual. "Long day?" she asked, forcing a note of concern into her voice. William nodded, collapsing onto the bed beside her. "You have no idea. Some complications with the Manila project. Nothing I can't handle, but it's giving me a headache." Maria's heart raced. This was her moment, perhaps her only chance to confront him directly. "William," she began, her voice soft but firm, "we need to talk about your business in the Philippines." William's body tensed, almost imperceptibly. If Maria hadn't been watching for it, she might have missed it. "What about it?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "I know what you're doing," Maria said, the words tumbling out before she could lose her nerve. "The land grabs, the displaced communities, the threats. I know everything." For a moment, William was silent, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his features, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, Maria," he said, his voice a mixture of condescension and amusement. "What exactly do you think you know?" The dismissive tone in his voice ignited a fire in Maria's chest. "I'm not a fool, William. I've seen the documents, heard the conversations. I visited the sites myself when we were in Manila. What you're doing is wrong, and I won't be a part of it anymore." William's smile faded, replaced by a cold, hard look that Maria had never seen before. "Be very careful, my dear," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're playing a game you don't understand." "It's not a game!" Maria shot back, her own anger rising to meet his. "These are people's lives you're destroying. My people." William stood, looming over her. "Your people?" he scoffed. "You gave up the right to call them that when you married me, when you chose this life." Maria stood as well, refusing to be intimidated. "I didn't choose this. I chose love, or what I thought was love. I never agreed to be complicit in your crimes." For a moment they stood there, facing each other like adversaries across a battlefield. Then William's expression changed. If Maria didn't know better. "Maria, darling," he said, reaching out to touch her cheek. She flinched away. "You're upset, I understand, but you're not seeing the bigger picture. What we're doing in the Philippines, it's progress, development. In the long run, it will benefit everyone. Maria shook her head, disgusted. Don't try to justify it, William. There's no excuse for what you're doing. William's face hardened again. And what exactly do you plan to do about it? Go to the authorities, the press. Who do you think they'll believe? A powerful businessman or his foreign wife? The threat was clear in his words, but Maria refused to back down. I have evidence, William. Documents, recordings. If anything happens to me, it all goes public. For the first time, she saw a flicker of fear in William's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a calculating look that chilled her to the bone. Oh, Maria, he said, his voice almost sad. I really wish you hadn't said that. Before Maria could react, William's hand shot out, grabbing her arm with bruising force. You've forced my hand, you know, he said, his voice eerily calm. I had such plans for us, such a future. But now you've become a liability. Maria struggled against his grip, fear and anger warring within her. Let go of me, she hissed. You won't get away with this. William's laugh was cold, mirthless. But I already have, my dear, for years, and I'll continue to do so, with or without you. With a final, painful squeeze, he released her arm. I'm going out, he said, straightening his tie. When I return, I expect you to have come to your senses. Remember, Maria, you're nothing without me. Nothing. As the door slammed behind him, Maria sank to the floor, her body shaking with suppressed sobs. For a moment, just a moment, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her fear and despair. But then, as the last rays of sunlight faded from the room, Maria felt a new emotion rising within her. Determination, resolve. She had come too far, risked too much to give up now. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone. It was time to set her plan in motion. Time to bring William's empire crashing down, no matter the cost to herself. As she dialed the first number on her list, Maria took a deep breath. The fairy tale was well and truly over, but perhaps, just perhaps, a new story was about to begin. A story of justice, of redemption, of a woman who refused to be silenced. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice answered, "Hello?" Maria's voice was steady as she spoke. "It's time. I'm ready to tell you everything." The early morning sun had barely begun to peek through the towering skyscrapers of New York City when Maria awoke with a start. Her heart raced as the events of the previous night came flooding back to her. The confrontation with William, his thinly veiled threats, and her own desperate phone call seeking help, all swirled in her mind like a chaotic storm. She glanced at the empty space beside her in the bed, a mixture of relief and anxiety washing over her. William hadn't returned home last night, and while that gave her a temporary reprieve, it also filled her with dread about what he might be planning. Maria forced herself out of bed, wincing at the bruise forming on her arm where William had grabbed her. She moved quickly, gathering the documents and evidence she had meticulously collected over the past weeks. Every paper, every recording felt like a ticking time bomb in her hands. As she worked, her phone buzzed insistently. A text from an unknown number flashed on the screen. Meeting set, 1 hour, Central Park, Bethesda Fountain. Come alone. Maria's breath caught in her throat. This was it. The journalist she had contacted last night was ready to meet. She looked around the luxurious penthouse, at all the trappings of the life she had thought was her dream come true. Now it all felt hollow, tainted by the knowledge of how it had been acquired. With shaking hands, she finished packing a small bag with her most important possessions and the damning evidence against William. As she zipped it closed, she caught sight of her wedding ring glinting in the early morning light. For a moment, she hesitated, memories of happier times threatening to weaken her resolve. Then, with a decisive motion, she slipped the ring off her finger and left it on the bedside table. There was no going back now. The streets of New York were already bustling with early morning commuters as Maria made her way to Central Park. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see William or one of his associates following her, but there was no sign of pursuit, just the usual crowd of New Yorkers hurrying to start their day. As she approached the Bethesda Fountain, Maria's eyes scanned the area, searching for anyone who might be the journalist she was meant to meet. Her gaze settled on a woman sitting on a bench on her knees and a cup of coffee beside her. The woman looked up, meeting Maria's eyes with a knowing glance. Maria approached cautiously, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone in the park could hear it. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I'm looking for someone who might be interested in a story about corporate corruption and land grabbing in the Philippines." The woman's eyes widened slightly, then she nodded, gesturing for Maria to sit. "I'm Lisa Chen, investigative reporter. You for the New York Times. You must be Maria. I got your message last night." Maria sank onto the bench, relief washing over her. "Yes. That's me. I have evidence, documents, recordings, everything you'll need to expose what William Fairfax and his company are doing in my country." Lisa leaned in, her voice low and urgent. "Before we go any further, I need to know, are you sure about this? Once we publish, there's no going back. Your life will never be the same." For a moment, Maria hesitated. The weight of what she was about to do pressed down on her. But then she thought of the families being forced from their homes, of the communities being destroyed, all in the name of profit. Her resolve hardened. "I'm sure," she said firmly. "I can't stand by and watch this happen, not when I have the power to stop it." Lisa nodded, a look of respect crossing her face. "All right then, let's see what you've got." For the next hour, Maria laid out everything she had discovered. She showed Lisa the documents detailing the land acquisitions, played recordings of conversations she had secretly made, and described what she had seen with her own eyes in the Philippines. As she spoke, Lisa's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard, taking rapid notes. "This is explosive stuff, Maria," Lisa said when Maria had finished. "If even half of what you're saying is true, it could bring down not just William Fairfax, but a whole network of corrupt officials and businessmen." Maria felt a mix of relief and fear at Lisa's words. "So you'll publish the story?" Lisa nodded. "We'll need to corroborate some of your evidence, of course, and our legal team will need to go over everything. But yes, we'll publish. It might take a few days to get everything in order, though." Maria's heart sank. A few days. She wasn't sure she had that long before William made his move. As if reading her thoughts, Lisa reached out and squeezed her hand. "You're not safe, are you?" she asked gently. Maria shook her head, fighting back tears. "I don't think so. William, he threatened me last night. I'm afraid of what he might do when he realizes I've gone to the press." Lisa's expression hardened. "We need to get you somewhere safe. I have contacts, people who can help protect whistleblowers like you. Will you trust me to arrange something?" Maria nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time since her confrontation with William. "Yes, please, I don't know where else to turn." Lisa quickly made a series of phone calls, speaking in hushed tones. Finally, she turned back to Maria. "Okay, I've arranged for you to stay at a safe house. It's not luxurious, but it's secure. You'll need to hand over your phone and any other electronic devices, though. We can't risk William tracking you." Maria hesitated for a moment, then pulled out her phone and handed it to Lisa. It felt like cutting off a lifeline, but she knew it was necessary. Lisa took the phone and quickly removed the SIM card, crushing it under her heel. "Come on," Lisa said, standing up. "We need to move quickly. I'll drive you to the safe house myself." As they walked briskly through the park, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her nerves on edge. Lisa noticed her unease and picked up the pace. They had just reached Lisa's car when Maria spotted a familiar figure in the distance. Her blood ran cold as she recognized one of William's security personnel, scanning the crowd with purposeful intent. "Lisa," Maria hissed, ducking down beside the car. "We've been found. One of William's men is here." Lisa's eyes widened, but she remained calm. "Get in the car now. Keep your head down." Maria slid into the passenger seat, her heart racing. As Lisa started the engine, as they pulled away from the curb, Maria risked a glance back. The security guard was moving in their direction, a hand to his ear as if speaking into a hidden microphone. Lisa drove skillfully through the New York traffic, taking sudden turns and doubling back on their route to shake off any potential pursuit. Maria's knuckles were white as she gripped the door handle, every siren and horn blast making her jump. After what felt like hours, but was probably only about 45 minutes, Lisa finally pulled into an underground parking garage in a nondescript apartment building in Brooklyn. "We're here," she said, her voice tense. "Let's move quickly." Lisa constantly checking over her shoulder. Finally, they reached a door at the end of a long hallway. Lisa knocked in a specific pattern, and after a moment, the door opened to reveal a stern-looking man with close-cropped gray hair. there. This is Frank, Lisa explained to Maria. He's ex-military and now works in private security. He'll be keeping you safe until we can publish the story. Frank ushered them inside, quickly closing and locking the door behind them. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished, but it had a feeling of security that made Maria's tense muscles relax slightly. No one knows you're here except for me and my most trusted colleagues, Lisa assured her. You'll be safe here. Frank will make sure of that. Maria nodded, suddenly feeling exhausted. The adrenaline that had been keeping her going was starting to wear off, leaving her drained and overwhelmed. What happens now? She asked, sinking onto a worn sofa. Lisa sat beside her, her expression serious. Now we work as fast as we can to verify your information and prepare the story for publication. It shouldn't take more than a few days. In the meantime, you stay here. Don't try to contact anyone, don't go near the windows, and do exactly what Frank tells you. Understand? Maria nodded again, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. She was in hiding, cut off from everything and everyone she knew, with only the hope that her actions would make a difference. As Lisa prepared to leave, she turned back to Maria one last time. You're incredibly brave, you know that. What you're doing, it's going to help a lot of people. Maria managed a small smile. I hope so. It has to be worth it, doesn't it? Lisa squeezed her hand. It will be, I promise. With that, Lisa was gone, leaving Maria alone with Frank in the small, quiet apartment. Frank gave her a brief tour, showing her the bedroom where she'd be sleeping and explaining the security measures in place. There's no internet access here, he explained gruffly, and the phones are all burner cells. We change them regularly. You're as off the grid as it's possible to be in New York City. Maria nodded, trying to take it all in. It felt surreal, like she had stepped into some kind of spy movie. But the gravity of her situation was all too real. As night fell, Maria found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She sat by the window, careful to stay hidden behind the heavy curtains, and looked out at the unfamiliar Brooklyn skyline. Somewhere out there, William was surely looking for her. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Days passed in a blur of anxiety and boredom. Frank was a constant, reassuring presence, but he wasn't much for conversation. Maria spent her time going over her statement again and again, making sure she hadn't forgotten any crucial details. Lisa called once a day on a secure line to update her on the progress of the story. On the fourth day, Lisa's call came earlier than usual. Maria's heart raced as she answered the phone. It's done, Lisa said without preamble. The story is ready. We're publishing online in an hour, and it'll be on the front page of tomorrow's paper. Maria felt a rush of emotions, relief and fear and excitement, all mingling together. What happens now? She asked, her voice shaky. Now, Lisa said, we wait for the fallout. Maria, I want you to know, this story, it's bigger than we initially thought. The connections we've uncovered, the web of corruption, it goes deep. You've blown the lid off something huge. Maria closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Will it be enough? Will it stop what's happening in the Philippines? It's already having an effect, Lisa assured her. We've had inquiries from the FBI, the SEC, even Interpol. William Fairfax and his associates are going to have a lot of questions to answer. As Maria hung up the phone, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had done it. She had stood up for what was right, had given a voice to those who had been silenced. Whatever came next, she would face it knowing she had made a difference. An hour later, Frank's burner phone pinged with a news alert. The story was live. Maria read it with trembling hands, seeing her own words woven into a damning expose of corporate greed and corruption. William's name was there in black and white, his crimes laid bare for the world to see. As she finished reading, Frank's phone began to ring incessantly. News outlets from around the world were picking up the story, each revelation sparking new investigations and accusations. You did it, kid, Frank said, a rare smile crossing his face. You've started a firestorm. Maria nodded, a mix of pride and apprehension filling her. She had indeed started something, but she knew it was far from over. William wouldn't go down without a fight, and she was still in danger. As if on cue, Lisa called again, her voice urgent. Maria, we need to move threats, and we have reason to believe he might know where you are. Maria's heart raced as she looked at Frank, who was already moving into action, grabbing go bags and checking his weapon. Where am I going? Maria asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Somewhere William and his cronies can't reach you, Lisa replied. "We're getting you out of the country. A car will be there in 10 minutes. Be ready." As Maria hurried to gather her few belongings, she caught a glimpse of herself in a mirror. The woman who looked back at her was different from the one who had arrived at this safe house just days ago. Her eyes were steelier, her jaw set with determination. She was no longer William Fairfax's trophy wife. She was Maria Santos, whistleblower and fighter for justice. The sound of screeching tires outside jolted her back to reality. Frank peered out the window, then nodded to her. "It's time. Let's go." As they hurried down the stairs, Maria's mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. She was leaving behind the life she had known, stepping into an uncertain future. But for the first time in a long time, she felt truly free. The car was waiting, engine running. As they emerged from the building, Maria slid into the back seat, her heart pounding as Frank took position in the front, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. As the car pulled away, speeding through the streets of Brooklyn towards an unknown destination, Maria allowed herself one last look back. The New York skyline glittered in the distance, a reminder of the life she was leaving behind. But as she turned to face forward, Maria felt a surge of determination. Her journey wasn't ending, it was just beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them head-on, armed with the truth and the knowledge that she had done the right thing. The car accelerated, merging onto the highway, carrying Maria towards her new life, a life of purpose, of fighting for what was right, a life that was truly her own. The car sped through the night, its headlights cutting through the darkness as it made its way towards JFK Airport. Maria sat in the back seat, her heart racing with every mile that passed. Frank, ever vigilant, kept his eyes on the road and the rear-view mirror, watching for any signs of pursuit. As they approached the airport, Maria's mind whirled with questions. Where was she going? What would happen next? The enormity of what she had done was finally starting to sink in. She had exposed one of the most powerful men in New York, had blown the whistle on a corruption scandal that spanned continents. There was no going back now. Frank's voice cut through her thoughts. "We're almost there. Remember, keep your head down and stay close to me. We don't know who might be watching." Maria nodded, pulling the hood of her jacket lower over her face. As they pulled up to the departures terminal, she saw Lisa waiting for them, a small suitcase by her side. The sight of a familiar face sent a wave of relief through Maria. "Quickly now," Lisa said. As Maria and Frank approached, she handed Maria a passport and boarding pass. "Your flight leaves in an hour. We don't have much time." Maria glanced at the passport. It bore her photo, but a different name. "Anna Cruz," she read aloud, looking questioningly at Lisa. "Just a precaution," Lisa explained. "We can't risk William's people tracking your real name." Ndai. As they made their way through the airport, Maria felt as though every eye was on her. Each security guard, each fellow traveler seemed a potential threat. But Frank's steady presence beside her and Lisa's reassuring glances kept her moving forward. They reached the security checkpoint and Maria's heart leapt into her throat. What if they discovered her false identity? What if William had somehow alerted the authorities? "This is where we leave you," Lisa said, giving Maria a quick hug. "Frank will go through security with you, but he can't board the plane. Once you're through, you're on your own." Maria nodded, trying to swallow past the lump in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Lisa squeezed her hand. "No, thank you. What you've done, it's going to change lives. Never forget that." With a final nod to Frank, Lisa turned and disappeared into the crowd. Maria took a deep breath and stepped up to the security line, Frank a reassuring presence behind her. To her immense relief, she made it through security without incident. Her new identity held up under scrutiny, and soon she found herself in the bustling international terminal. "This is where I leave you," Frank said gruffly. "Your boarding pass has your gate number. Don't talk to anyone. Don't make eye contact. Just get on that plane." Maria nodded, suddenly feeling very small and alone. "Will I ever see you or Lisa again?" Frank's stern expression softened slightly. "It's better if you don't, but know that we'll be watching out." With that, he was gone, melting into the crowd as if he'd never been there. Maria took a shaky breath and made her way to her gate. It wasn't until she was settled in her seat, the plane taxiing down the runway, that she allowed herself to relax slightly. As the lights of New York faded beneath her, Maria felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. She was leaving behind everything she had known, flying towards an uncertain future. But for the first time in a long time, she felt truly free. The flight was long, giving Maria ample time to think. She wondered what William was doing now, how he had reacted when the story broke. Had he already guessed that she was behind it? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Hours later, As the plane began its descent, Maria got her first glimpse of her destination. The sparkling lights of Manila Bay spread out beneath her, a sight both familiar and strange. She was back in the Philippines, but everything was different now. As she made her way through customs, Maria half expected to be stopped to see William's men waiting for her. But she passed through without incident, emerging into the humid Manila night undetected. A man was waiting for her, holding a sign with her new name. "Ms. Cruz?" he said as she approached. "I'm Miguel. Lisa sent me to pick you up." Maria nodded, following Miguel to a waiting car. As they drove through the familiar streets of Manila, now made strange by her circumstances, Miguel filled her in on the arrangements that had been made. "You'll be staying at a safe house in Quezon City," he explained. "It's run by a local NGO that helps whistleblowers and activists. You'll be safe there while we figure out our next steps." Maria's mind reeled. Next steps. She hadn't thought beyond. Exposing William's corruption. What was she supposed to do now? The safe house was a nondescript apartment in a busy neighborhood. As Miguel showed her around, explaining the security measures in place, Maria felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The events of the past few days, the stress and fear and adrenaline, suddenly caught up with her. "Get some rest," Miguel said kindly. "We'll talk more in the morning." As Maria lay in bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her old city, she wondered if she had made the right choice. She had given up everything, her comfortable life, her security, all to expose the truth. Was it worth it? But then she thought of the families she had seen displaced, the communities destroyed by William's greed. She thought of the corrupt officials who had been exposed, the investigations that were now underway. Yes, she decided, it was worth it. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and debriefings. Maria met with lawyers, activists, and journalists, and telling her story over and over again. Each time she spoke, she felt a little stronger, a little more certain of her path. One afternoon, as she sat in a meeting with a group of anti-corruption activists, Maria's phone buzzed with a news alert. Her heart stopped as she read the headline, "William Fairfax arrested on charges of fraud and corruption." The room erupted in cheers, but Maria felt oddly numb. It was really happening. The man she had once loved, the man who had betrayed her and so many others, was facing justice. As the days turned into weeks, Maria found herself becoming more involved in the fight against corruption. She worked with local NGOs, sharing her experiences and helping to develop strategies to combat corporate greed and land grabbing. It wasn't easy. There were nights when she lay awake, haunted by memories of her old life, by fears of what William might do if he ever found her. But each morning, she woke up with a sense of purpose that she had never known before. One day, about a month after her return to the Philippines, Maria received a call from Lisa. "Turn on the news," Lisa said without preamble. Maria did as she was told, her jaw dropping as she saw the scene unfolding on the screen. William was being led out of a courthouse in handcuffs, his once immaculate suit rumpled, his face haggard. "He's been denied bail," Lisa explained. "The evidence against him is overwhelming. Maria, you did it. He's going to prison for a long time." As the reality of the situation sank in, Maria felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It was over. William could no longer hurt her, could no longer hurt anyone. In the months that followed, Maria threw herself into her work with renewed vigor. She testified in court cases, spoke at conferences, and worked tirelessly to help communities fight against corporate exploitation. It wasn't the life she had imagined for herself when she first came to America as William's bride. It was harder, more dangerous, but infinitely more fulfilling. She had found her purpose, her voice. 1 year to the day after she had fled New York, Maria stood on a stage in Manila, addressing a crowd of activists. As she looked out at the sea of faces, all united in their fight for justice, she felt a sense of belonging that she had never known before. "We all have a choice," she said, her voice strong and clear. "We can choose to be silent in the face of injustice, or we can choose to speak out. It's not an easy choice. It comes with risks, with sacrifices, but it's a choice that can change the world." As the crowd erupted in applause, Maria felt tears prick at her eyes. She thought of the naive nurse she had once been, of the trophy wife she had become, of the fighter she was now. It had been a long, difficult journey, but standing there in that moment, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The applause faded, and Maria stepped down from the stage, immediately surrounded by people wanting to shake her hand, to thank her for her courage. As she made her way through the crowd, she caught sight of a familiar face, Lena, her old friend, from the hospital, pushed through the throng of people and enveloped Maria Maria in a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you," Lena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Maria hugged her back, feeling a rush of gratitude for this connection to her old life. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "You were the one who always encouraged me to dream bigger." As they pulled apart, Lena's eyes were shining with tears and admiration. "You've become such an inspiration, Maria, not just to me, but to so many people." Maria felt a lump form in her throat. "I'm just trying to do what's right," she said softly. Lena shook her head. "It's more than that. You've given people hope. You've shown them that one person really can make a difference." As they talked, catching up on the years they had missed, Maria felt a sense of coming full circle. She had left Manila as a young nurse, full of dreams and ambitions. She had returned as a fighter, a whistleblower, a voice for the voiceless. Later that night, as Maria stood on the balcony of her small apartment, looking out over the city she had once left behind, she felt a profound sense of peace. The path that had led her here had been fraught with danger and heartbreak, but it had also brought her to this moment, to this purpose. She thought of William, now serving his sentence in a New York prison. She thought of the communities in the Philippines that were now protected from exploitation, of the corrupt officials who had been exposed and brought to justice. But mostly, she thought of the future. There was still so much work to be done, so many battles to be fought, but now she was ready for them. She had found her strength, her voice, her purpose. As the lights of Manila twinkled below her, Maria made a silent vow. She would continue to fight, to speak out, to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost, no matter the danger, because now she knew the truth that had always been inside her, the truth that had led her on this incredible journey. One person really could make a difference. And she, Maria Santos, once a simple nurse from Manila, now a respected activist and whistleblower, was living proof of that fact. The night air was warm and fragrant, carrying the sounds of the city she had rediscovered. Maria took a deep breath, feeling more alive than she had in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fights. But for now, in this moment, she was exactly where she needed to be. She was home in every sense of the word, and she was ready for whatever came next. The soft glow of dawn was just beginning to paint the Manila skyline when Maria's phone buzzed. Insistently on her nightstand, she groaned, reaching for it with eyes still heavy from sleep. The number was unfamiliar, but something made her answer anyway. "Hello?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "Maria Santos?" The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and decidedly American. "This is Agent Sarah Thompson with the FBI. I apologize for the early hour, but we need to speak with you urgently." Maria sat up, suddenly wide awake. Her heart raced as her mind flooded with possibilities. Had something happened to William? Was she in some kind of trouble? "What's this about?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Ms. Santos, new evidence has come to light in the Fairfax case. We believe you may be in danger. We need you to come in and speak with us as soon as possible." Maria's blood ran cold. She had known this peace couldn't last forever, but she had hoped for more time. "I'm in Manila," she said. "I can't just come in." "We're aware of your location, Ms. Santos. We've arranged for a secure flight to bring you to New York. A car will be at your apartment in 1 hour to take you to the airport. Pack light and don't tell anyone where you're going." Before Maria could protest further, the line went dead. She sat there for a moment, her mind reeling. Then, operating on autopilot, she began to pack. An hour later, true to Agent Thompson's tinted windows pulled up outside her apartment. Two men in suits, their eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, ushered her into the vehicle. As they sped towards the airport, Maria's mind raced with questions. What new evidence had been uncovered? And more importantly, what kind of danger was she in? The flight to New York was a blur of anxiety and jet lag. Maria dozed fitfully, her dreams filled with shadowy figures and William's face twisted in anger. When they finally touched down at JFK, she felt as if she had barely slept at all. Agent Thompson was waiting for her at the gate, a tall woman with short blonde hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Ms. Santos," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. We have a lot to discuss." They drove to a nondescript office building in Manhattan, the streets eerily quiet in the early morning hours. As they rode the elevator up to what seemed like the top floor, Maria finally found her voice. "Agent Thompson," she said. Going on, what kind of danger am I in? The agent's face remained impassive. It's better if we discuss this with the whole team. We'll explain everything soon. The elevator doors opened to reveal a bustling office space filled with agents. Hurrying back and forth, their faces grim and focused. Agent Thompson led Maria to a conference room where several other agents were already gathered. As Maria took a seat, her eyes fell on a familiar face across the table. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized Lisa Chen, the journalist who had helped her expose William's corruption. Lisa offered a small, reassuring smile, but her eyes were filled with concern. Agent Thompson cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention. Ms. Santos, thank you for coming. We've asked you here because we've uncovered some disturbing information about William Fairfax and his associates. She clicked a remote, and a series of images appeared on a large screen at the end of the room. Maria's breath caught in her throat as she recognized faces from William's inner circle. Men and women she had dined with, laughed with, never suspecting the darkness that lay beneath their polished exteriors. We've discovered that Fairfax's operation goes far beyond what we initially thought, Agent Thompson continued. It's not just about land grabbing and displacement. There's evidence of money laundering, human trafficking, and connections to international crime syndicates. Maria felt the blood drain from her face. She had known William was corrupt, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. But what does this have to do with me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lisa spoke up then, her voice gentle but urgent. Maria, your testimony was the key that started this whole investigation. Without you, we never would have uncovered the full extent of Fairfax's crimes. But now, well, now they know it was you who brought them down. Agent Thompson nodded grimly. We've intercepted communications indicating that there's a price on your head, Ms. Santos. Fairfax's associates want revenge, and they're willing to pay handsomely to get it. Maria felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. She had known there would be risks when she decided to expose William's corruption, but she had never imagined it would come to this. What am I supposed to do? She asked, hating how small and scared her voice sounded. That's why we brought you here, Agent Thompson said. We're offering you a place in the Witness Protection Program. New identity, new location, a chance to start over somewhere safe. Maria's mind reeled. Witness protection. Leave behind everything and everyone she knew again? But as she looked around the room, at the grim faces of the agents and Lisa's concerned eyes, she realized she might not have a choice. How long do I have to decide? She asked. I'm afraid we need an answer now, Ms. Santos, Agent Thompson replied. The threat is imminent. If you agree, we'll need to move you immediately. Maria closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She thought of the life she had built in Manila, of the work she had been doing, the people she had been helping. Could she really give all that up? But then she thought of the communities she had helped save from William's greed, of the corrupt officials who had been brought to justice because of her testimony. She had made a difference once. Perhaps she could do it again, somewhere new. She opened her eyes, meeting Agent Thompson's steady gaze. Okay, she said, her voice stronger now. I'll do it. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Maria was whisked away to a secure location where she met with a team of specialists who would help create her new identity. They asked her endless questions, building a profile for her new life. As the day wore on, Maria felt a strange mix of emotions. There was fear, certainly, at the thought of the danger, excitement, of possibility. This was a chance to start over, to become someone new. It was late in the evening when Agent Thompson returned, a thick folder in her hands. Ms. Santos, she said, then corrected herself. I should say, Ms. Rivera, your new life is ready. Maria, now Elena Rivera, took the folder with trembling hands. Inside was everything she would need to begin her new life. Identity documents, background information, even a small photo album filled with pictures of a family she had never met but was now supposed to be hers. You'll be relocating to Seattle, Agent Thompson explained. We've set you up with a job at a local community center. It's not nursing, but we thought your experience in community outreach would be a good fit. Maria, no. Elena nodded. It made sense. She couldn't go back to nursing, not with her face having been splashed across the news during the Fairfax trial. When do I leave? She asked. Tonight, Agent Thompson replied. We have a private jet standing by. I'm sorry, but you won't be able to say goodbye to anyone. It's too risky. Eleanor felt a pang of sadness at that, but she understood. This was the price of safety, of a new beginning. As she boarded the plane a few hours later, Eleanor took one last look at the New York skyline. So much had happened in this city, both wonderful and terrible. It had been the backdrop for her fairy tale romance, and then for its brutal unraveling. Now it would become just another memory, a part of a past she was leaving behind. The flight to Seattle was long, giving Elena time to study her new identity. She memorized details about her fictional past, about the family she was supposed to have. By the time the plane touched down, she felt as if she was stepping into a role in an elaborate play. A car was waiting for her at the airport, driven by another agent who would help her settle into her new life. As they drove through the rain-slicked streets of Seattle, Elena stared out the window, taking in the unfamiliar landscape. The towering evergreens and misty mountains were a far cry from the tropical warmth of Manila or the concrete jungle of New York. Her new apartment was small but cozy, already furnished and stocked with the basics she would need. The agent gave her a quick tour, explaining the security measures in place and going over the rules of her new life one last time. "Remember," he said as he prepared to leave, "you can't contact anyone from your old life. Not family, not friends, no one. Your safety depends on maintaining this new identity." Elena nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. This was really happening. She was saying goodbye to Maria Santos forever. As the door closed behind the agent, Elena found herself alone in her new home, in her new life. She walked slowly through the apartment, running her hands over unfamiliar furniture, looking at pictures of strangers who were now supposed to be her family. She caught sight of herself in a mirror and paused. The face looking back at her was the same, and yet somehow different. Her hair had been cut and dyed a rich auburn, and colored contacts had turned her dark brown eyes to a deep green. It was subtle, but enough to make her look like a different person. "Elena Rivera," she told her reflection. "That's who I am now." The first few weeks in Seattle were a blur of adjustment and loneliness. Elena threw herself into her new job at the community center, grateful for the distraction it provided. She met her co-workers, learned the rhythms of her new neighborhood, and slowly began to settle into her new identity. But at night, alone in her apartment, she would often find herself overcome with a deep sense of loss. She missed her family, her friends, the work she'd been doing in Manila. She missed being Maria Santos with all her flaws and strengths. One rainy afternoon, about a month after her arrival in Seattle, Elena was sorting through donations at the community center when she came across a familiar sight. It was a traditional Filipino basket, intricately woven and painted with bright colors. She picked it up, running her fingers over the familiar patterns, and felt tears prick at her eyes. "That's beautiful," a voice said behind her. Elena turned to see Sarah, one of her co-workers, watching her with curiosity. "Do you know what it is?" For a moment, Elena hesitated. Her instinct was to share her knowledge, to talk about her homeland, but she caught herself, remembering her new identity. Elena Rivera had never been to the Philippines. "I'm not sure," she said, setting the basket down carefully. "But it is beautiful, isn't it?" Sarah nodded, then tilted her head, studying Eleanor closely. "Are you okay? You look a little upset." Eleanor forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a little tired, I guess." As Sarah moved away, Eleanor took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was the reality of her new life. She would have to be constantly on guard, and how much she revealed. But as the weeks turned into months, Elena found herself settling into her new role more comfortably. She made friends at work, joined a local book club, even started volunteering at an animal shelter on weekends. Slowly but surely, Elena Rivera was becoming real. Yet there were moments when Maria Santos would peek through, like when she instinctively reached for a Filipino spice in the international aisle of the grocery store, or when she found herself humming a Tagalog lullaby as she worked. It was during one of these moments, almost 6 months after her arrival in Seattle, that Elena's carefully constructed new life was shaken to its core. She was walking home from work, lost in thought, when she noticed a man across the street watching her intently. At first, she tried to brush it off as paranoia, but as she quickened her pace, she saw the man do the same. Heart racing, Elena ducked into a nearby coffee shop, her mind whirling. Had they found her? Was her cover blown? She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, ready to call the emergency number she had been given. But before she could dial, the man entered the coffee shop. Elena froze, her finger hovering over the call button. The man approached her slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Miss Santos," Santos, he said quietly, using her old name. Please don't be alarmed. I'm here to help you. Elena's heart pounded in her chest. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. My name is Elena Rivera. The man nodded, a look of understanding crossing his face. Of course, Ms. Rivera, my apologies. My name is Michael Reyes. I'm with the Philippine National Bureau of Investigation. We've been working with the FBI on the Fairfax case. Elena felt a mix of relief and renewed fear wash over her. What do you want? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael glanced around the coffee shop, then leaned in closer. We need your help, Ms. Riv. Elena, the case against Fairfax's associates in the Philippines is falling apart. We need your testimony. Elena shook her head, taking a step back. I can't. I'm in witness protection. I can't go back. Michael's eyes were pleading. I know it's asking a lot, but without your testimony, these men will walk free. They'll continue to exploit and harm innocent people. You're our only hope. Elena felt as if the ground was shifting beneath her feet. She had thought this chapter of her life was closed, that she had left Maria Santos and all her battles behind. But now, here it was, reaching out to pull her back in. She looked at Michael, saw the desperation in his eyes, and felt a familiar fire ignite in her chest, the same fire that had driven her to expose William's corruption in the first place. If I do this, she said slowly, what happens to me, to Elena Rivera? Michael shook his head. I don't know. That would be up to the FBI, but I can promise you this. If you help us, we'll do everything in our power to keep you safe. Elena closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, there was a determination in her gaze that hadn't been there before. Okay, she said, I'll do it, but not as Elena Rivera. If I'm going to do this, I'm doing it as Maria Santos. Michael nodded, relief washing over his face. Thank you, Maria. You're saving lives, you know that? As they left the coffee shop, together, Maria felt a strange sense of homecoming. She had tried to leave this part of her life behind, had tried to become someone new, but in this moment, she realized that Maria Santos, with all her courage and conviction, had never really gone away. She was stepping back into danger, back into the spotlight she had tried so hard to escape, but she was also stepping back into her true self, into the woman who had stood up against corruption and injustice. As they drove towards the local FBI office, where arrangements would be made for her return to the Philippines, Maria felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. She didn't know what the future held, what new challenges and dangers she might face, but she did know one thing. Whether she was Maria Santos or Elena Rivera, whether she was in Manila, New York, or Seattle, she would always choose to fight for what was right. It was who she was, at her core, and no new identity, no witness protection program could ever change that. The Seattle rain beat against the car windows, but Maria barely noticed. Her mind was already racing ahead, preparing for the battles to come. She was going home in more ways than one, and this time she was ready. The humid air of Manila enveloped Maria as she stepped off the plane, a stark contrast to the cool, misty climate of Seattle she had left behind. Despite the years away, the familiar scents and sounds of her homeland immediately transported her back to a life she thought she had left behind forever. Agent Thompson, crowded terminal with watchful eyes. Remember, Ms. Santos, your safety is our top priority. We'll be with you every step of the way. Maria nodded, her heart racing with a mix of fear and determination. She was back as herself, as Maria Santos, no longer hiding behind the facade of Elena Rivera. The weight of her true identity felt both liberating and terrifying. As they made their way through the airport, Maria couldn't help but notice the curious glances thrown her way. Her face, once splashed across newspapers and television screens during the Fairfax trial, was still recognizable to many. She kept her head down, following Agent Thompson's lead as they weaved through the crowd. A sleek black SUV was waiting for them outside, its tinted windows offering a shield from prying eyes. As they sped through the familiar streets of Manila, Maria found herself drinking in the sights of her hometown. So much had changed, yet so much remained the same. They arrived at a nondescript building in the heart of the city, its unassuming exterior belying its importance. Inside, Maria was led to a conference room where a team of Filipino Filipino and American officials were waiting. Michael Reyes, the NBI agent, who had found her in Seattle, stepped forward to greet her. "Ms. Santos, thank you for coming. We can't express how crucial your testimony is to this case." Maria took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes to bring these people to justice." The next few hours were a whirlwind of briefings and preparations. Maria listened intently as the prosecutors laid out their case against William's former associates, many of whom she had once considered friends. The evidence was damning, but without her testimony to tie it all together, they feared the case would fall apart. As the meeting wrapped up, Maria felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was why she had come back, why she had risked everything. She couldn't let William's network of corruption continue to destroy lives. The days that followed were intense and grueling. Maria spent hours with the prosecutors, going over her testimony, reliving every moment of her time with William and his associates. It was emotionally draining, forcing her to confront memories she had tried so hard to bury. But through it all, Maria found strength she didn't know she possessed. Each time she faltered, each time the weight of what she was doing threatened to overwhelm her, she thought of the communities she was fighting for, the lives that hung in the balance. The night before the trial was set to begin, Maria stood on the balcony of her secure hotel room, looking out over the glittering lights of Manila. Agent Thompson joined her, offering a comforting presence. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" the agent asked, her voice gentle. Maria nodded, her eyes never leaving the city skyline. "I have to be. Too much is riding on this." Agent Thompson placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're braver than you know, Maria. What you're doing, it's going to change lives." As she lay in bed that night, sleep eluding her, Maria's mind raced with thoughts of the coming day. She thought of William, locked away in a New York prison, and wondered if he knew she was here, preparing to bring down what remained of his corrupt empire. The morning dawned bright and clear, the sun rising over Manila Bay as Maria was escorted to the courthouse. The streets were lined with reporters and curious onlookers, all eager to catch a glimpse of the woman who had brought down William Fairfax and was now back to finish what she had started. Inside the courtroom, Maria's eyes immediately fell on the defendants. Men and women she had once dined with, laughed with, now sat stone-faced, avoiding her gaze. She felt a mixture of anger and pity as she took her seat at the witness stand. As the questioning began, Maria found herself transported back in time. She recounted in vivid detail the lavish parties, the whispered conversations, the gradual realization of the corruption that surrounded her. Her voice grew stronger with each question, her resolve hardening as she laid bare the truth she had discovered. Hours passed, but Maria never faltered. She withstood the defense's attempts to discredit her, their insinuations that she was nothing more than a scorned woman seeking revenge. With each answer, she dismantled their arguments, her unwavering testimony a damning indictment of the defendant's actions. As the day's proceedings came to a close, Maria felt drained but triumphant. She had done it. She had faced her past, had stared down the people who had once made her feel small and powerless, and she had emerged victorious. The trial stretched on for weeks, with Maria called back to the stand multiple times. Each day brought new revelations, new evidence of the far-reaching consequences of William's corruption. Communities destroyed, lives ruined, all in the name of profit. Throughout it all, she drew strength from the supporters who gathered outside the courthouse each day, holding signs thanking her for her bravery. She found courage in the grateful looks from the families of those who had been displaced, who finally saw hope for justice. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the verdict was announced. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in cheers as the judge read out the sentences, years of imprisonment and millions in fines for each defendant. As Maria left the courthouse for the final time, she was met with a sea of cameras and microphones. Reporters clamored for a statement, but she found herself at a loss for words. How could she possibly express the magnitude of what had just happened? It was then that she spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Lena, her old friend from the hospital, pushed through the throng of reporters and enveloped Maria in a tight hug. "You did it," Lena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You really did it." In that moment, surrounded by the cheers of supporters and the flashing of cameras, Maria felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It was over. She had won. The days that followed were a blur of press conferences and meetings. Maria found herself thrust into the role of spokesperson for anti-corruption efforts, her story inspiring others to come forward with their own experiences. But as the excitement of the verdict began to fade, Maria found herself facing a new challenge. What now? She couldn't go back to being Elena Rivera, but she also couldn't simply slip back into her old life as if nothing had happened. It was during a quiet moment, as she sat in her hotel room contemplating her future, that Maria received an unexpected visitor. Michael Reyes, the NBI agent who had found her in Seattle, knocked on her door, a serious expression on his face. "Miss Santos," he said as she let him in, "we need to talk about your future." Maria's heart sank. Was this it? Was she about to be whisked away to another new identity, another new life? But as Michael began to speak, she realized this was something entirely different. "We've been impressed by your courage and your commitment to justice," he said. "We believe you could do a lot of good here in the Philippines, working with us to fight corruption." Maria stared at him, stunned. "Are you offering me a job?" Michael nodded. "It would be dangerous work, and it would mean giving up any chance of a quiet, anonymous life. But it would also mean making a real difference, continuing the fight you started." For a moment, Maria was silent, considering the offer. She thought of the life she had left behind in Seattle, the quiet routine she had built as Elena Rivera. She thought of the dangers she would face if she stayed in the Philippines, the constant threat from those who would seek to silence her. But then she thought of the communities she had helped save, of the lives that had been changed because she had chosen to speak out. She thought of the supporters outside the courthouse, of Lena's tearful embrace. Looking up at Michael, Maria felt a smile spread across her face. "When do I start?" The next few months were a whirlwind of activity as Maria threw herself into her new role. She worked tirelessly, using her unique perspective and experiences to help the NBI uncover and prosecute cases of corruption across the country. It wasn't easy work. There were long nights poring over documents, tense meetings with informants, and constant threats to her safety. But Maria found a sense of purpose in the work that she had never experienced before. She became a symbol of hope for many Filipinos, a living example that one person really could make a difference. Her story was told in schools and universities, inspiring a new generation to stand up against corruption and injustice. 1 year after the verdict that had brought down Williams' associates, Maria found herself back in the coastal region where her journey had begun. The community that had once faced destruction at the hands of Williams' company was now thriving, protected by new laws and regulations that Maria had helped put in place. As she walked along the beach, watching families enjoy the sunset, an old woman approached her. Maria recognized her as the same woman who had spoken to her years ago when she had first discovered the extent of William's plans. "You came back," the old woman said, her weathered face creasing in a smile. Maria nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. "I had to see it for myself, to know that it was all worth it." The old woman reached out, taking Maria's hand in her own. "It was worth it, child. You saved us all." As they stood there, watching the sun sink into the sea, Maria felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had lost so much, had given up the life she thought she wanted. But standing here, seeing the tangible results of her sacrifices, she knew she had gained something far more valuable, her true purpose. She had become the person she was always meant to be, a fighter for justice, a voice for the voiceless. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Maria turned to head back to the village. There was still work to be done, still battles to be fought. But for the first time in a long time, she felt truly, completely at home. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be more challenges, more dangers. But Maria Santos was ready to face them all. She had found her place in the world, and she wasn't going anywhere. As she walked away from the beach, the old woman's words echoed in her mind. "You saved us all." And in saving them, Maria realized she had also saved herself. The sun had barely risen over Manila when Maria's phone buzzed with an urgent message. She squinted at the screen, still groggy from a late night poring over case files. The message was from Michael Reyes, her colleague at the National Bureau of Investigation. "Emergency meeting. 1 hour. It's about Fairfax." Maria's heart raced as she read the name. William Fairfax, her ex-husband, the man whose corrupt empire she had helped bring down. It had been 2 years since the trial that had put William's associates behind bars. 2 years since Maria had started her new life side, working to fight corruption in the Philippines. What could have happened to warrant an emergency meeting? She arrived at the NBI headquarters with minutes to spare, her mind whirling with possibilities. The conference room was already full when she entered, faces grave and tense. Michael nodded to her as she took a seat. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began, his voice tight. "We've received intelligence that William Fairfax has escaped from prison." The room erupted in a flurry of exclamations and questions. Maria sat in stunned silence, her blood running cold. William free? It seemed impossible. Michael raised his hands, calling for quiet. "We don't have all the details yet, but it appears he had help from the outside, possibly from associates we didn't manage to catch in our initial investigation." He turned to Maria, his eyes filled with concern. "Maria, we have reason to believe he may try to come after you. You were instrumental in bringing down his operation, and he's had 2 years to plan his revenge." Maria nodded, forcing herself to remain calm. She had always known this was a possibility, had lived with the threat hanging over her head. But now that it was real, now that William was out there somewhere, possibly already on his way to the Philippines, the fear threatened to overwhelm her. "What do we do?" she asked, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "We're implementing our highest level of protective custody," Michael replied. "You'll be moved to a safe house immediately. We're also reaching out to our international partners to try and track Fairfax's movements." As the meeting continued, plans being made and tasks assigned, Maria found her mind drifting. She thought of the life she had built here in Manila, the work she had done, the difference she had made. Would it all be undone by William's escape? The next few days passed in a blur of heightened security and constant vigilance. Maria was moved to a heavily guarded safe house on the outskirts of the city, her movements restricted and monitored. She continued her work as best she could from this secluded location, but the strain of confinement and constant fear began to take its toll. It was on the 5th day of her protective custody that Maria received another unexpected visitor. Lisa Chen, the journalist who had helped her expose William's corruption years ago, was escorted into the safe house by a team of security personnel. "Lisa?" Maria exclaimed, rising from her seat in surprise. "What are you doing here?" Lisa's face was grim as she took a seat across from Maria. "I came as soon as I heard about Fairfax's escape. I've been doing some digging, Maria, and I don't think he's coming after you, at least not directly." Maria leaned forward, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" "I've been tracking some of Fairfax's old financial records," Lisa explained, pulling out a laptop. "There's been some unusual activity in accounts we thought were dormant. Large sums of money moving around, all centered here in the Philippines." As Lisa pulled up documents and financial records on her screen, Maria felt a chill run down her spine. The transactions, the locations, they all pointed to one thing. "He's trying to rebuild his operation," Maria whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Lisa nodded grimly. "That's what it looks like. And he's targeting the same communities you've been working to protect. It's like he's trying to undo everything you've accomplished." Maria sat back, her mind reeling. This was worse than she had imagined. William wasn't just coming for her, he was coming for everything she had fought for, everything she had. "We need to stop him," she said, her voice filled with determination. Lisa raised an eyebrow. "And how do you propose we do that? You're under protective custody, remember?" Maria stood, pacing the room as her mind raced. "We need to draw him out, force him to make a mistake. If he's really trying to rebuild his operation, he'll need to make contact with his old associates, the ones who aren't in prison." "That's dangerous, Maria," Lisa warned. "You'd be putting yourself at risk." "I'm already at risk," Maria countered. "At least this way, we have a chance of stopping him before he can do any real damage." Over the next few hours, Maria and Lisa worked together to formulate a plan. They would leak information about a fictitious land deal, one too tempting for William to resist. It would force him to come out of hiding, to make a move they could anticipate and counter. Convincing Michael and the NBI to go along with the plan was not easy. There were heated arguments, concerns raised about Maria's safety and the potential for the plan to backfire. But in the end, Maria's determination and the urgency of the situation won out. As the pieces of their plan fell into place, Maria felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. This was it, the final confrontation with William, the man who had once been her husband, who had betrayed her trust and exploited her homeland. The day of the operation dawned bright and clear. Maria stood in in front of the mirror in the safe house, steeling herself for what was to come. She would be playing the role of a corrupt official, seemingly willing to betray everything she had fought for in exchange for a cut of William's new operation. As she was fitted with a wire and given last-minute instructions by the NBI team, Maria caught sight of her reflection. Gone was the naive nurse who had fallen for William's charm. Gone was the terrified whistleblower who had fled to Seattle. In their place stood a woman of strength and determination, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The meeting was set to take place in a luxury hotel in the heart of Manila. As Maria was escorted into the opulent lobby, her heart pounded in her chest. Would William see through their ruse? Would he even show up or send one of his associates in his place? She was led to a private dining room, its windows offering a panoramic view of the city. And there, standing by the window with his back to her, was a figure she would recognize anywhere. "Hello, William," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil of emotions inside her. He turned, and Maria felt a jolt as she met his gaze. He looked older, harder, the years in prison having left their mark, but his eyes were the same, that mixture of charm and calculation that had once captivated her. "Maria," he said, a smile spreading across his face. "My dear, it's been too long." As they sat down to talk, the familiar dance of negotiations and double meanings began. William spoke of opportunities, of the chance to right past wrongs, all the while probing for information, testing Maria's supposed willingness to betray her principles. Maria played her part perfectly, feigning interest and greed all the while, guiding the conversation towards the information they needed. She could see the moment William began to relax, began to believe that he had won her over. It was then that everything went wrong. A commotion in the hallway outside caught their attention. The door burst open, revealing not the NBI agents Maria had expected, but a group of armed men, their faces hidden behind masks. "Mr. Fairfax," one of them said, his voice muffled, "it's time to go." William's face hardened as he turned to Maria. "You betrayed me again," he snarled, all pretense of charm gone. Before Maria could respond, before she could call for help, she felt a sharp pain in her neck. As darkness closed in around her, the last thing she saw was William's face, a mixture of anger and something that might have been regret. Maria awoke to the gentle rocking of a boat, the smell of sea air filling her nostrils. Her head pounded as she struggled to open her eyes, memories of what had happened flooding back. She was in a small cabin, her hands and feet bound. Through a porthole, she could see the open ocean, no land in sight. Panic threatened to overwhelm her as she realized the implications of her situation. She had been kidnapped, taken who knows where, with no way to call for help. The door to the cabin opened and William stepped in. He looked at her with a mixture of anger and something else, something Maria couldn't quite identify. "Why, Maria?" he asked, his voice tired. "Why couldn't you just leave well enough alone?" Maria struggled to sit up, fighting against her bonds. "Because what you were doing was wrong, William. It still is. You're destroying people's lives, all for your own gain." William sighed, sinking into a chair across from her. "You never understood. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to make real change. And is this your idea of real change?" Maria spat, anger giving her strength. "Kidnapping me, rebuilding your criminal empire." For a moment, William's mask slipped, and Maria saw a flicker of the man she had once loved. "I never wanted it to come to this," he said softly. "I had such plans for us, Maria. We could have done so much good together." Maria shook her head, disbelief and disgust warring within her. "Good? There was never any good in what you were doing, William. It was all about power and greed." William stood abruptly, his face hardening once more. "You'll see, Maria. When this is all over, you'll understand, and maybe then you'll finally be on the right side." As he left the cabin, locking the door behind him, Maria felt a chill run down her spine. What did William have planned? And more importantly, how was she going to get out of this situation? Days passed in a blur of fear and uncertainty. Maria was kept in the cabin, visited only by William and a silent guard who brought her meals. She tried to keep track of time, to figure out where they might be headed, but with no reference points beyond the endless ocean, it was impossible. William visited her daily, alternating between attempts to persuade her to join him and angry outbursts when she refused. Maria could see the toll the years in prison had taken on him, the way his charm now seemed forced, his temper her closer to the surface. It was during one of these visits, as William ranted about the injustice of his imprisonment, that Maria saw her opportunity. In his agitation, William had come too close, within reach of her bound hands. With a surge of adrenaline, Maria lunged forward, her fingers closing around the keycard clipped to William's belt. He stumbled back, surprise and anger flashing across his face. "You'll regret that," he snarled, advancing on her. But Maria was ready. As William reached for her, she brought her bound feet up, catching him in the stomach. He fell back, hitting his head on the edge of the desk with a sickening thud. For a moment, Maria froze, watching as William lay still on the floor. Then, snapping back to reality, she began to work on freeing herself. It was awkward and painful, but finally, she managed to use the key card to release her bonds. Heart pounding, Maria crept to the cabin door. She could hear movement outside, voices raised in alarm. They must have heard the commotion. It was now or never. Taking a deep breath, Maria swiped the key card and burst out of the cabin. She found herself on the deck of a large yacht, the open ocean stretching out in all directions. Crew members turned to stare at her in shock, giving her a precious few seconds head start. Maria ran, her bare feet slapping against the deck as shouts rose behind her. She had no plan beyond escape, no idea where she was or how she would get to safety. But the instinct for survival drove her forward. She reached the edge of the deck, the railing the only thing between her and the vast expanse of the ocean. For a split second, she hesitated. Then, hearing the pounding of feet behind her, she made her decision. Maria climbed onto the railing and, without looking back, dove into the water. The shock of the cold ocean hit her like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs. But as she surfaced, gasping for breath, she felt a surge of triumph. She was free. The shouts from the yacht grew more frantic as Maria began to swim, pushing herself away from the vessel with all her strength. She knew she couldn't outswim a boat, knew that her chances of survival in the open ocean were slim, but she also knew that she would rather face those odds than return to captivity. As she swam, her muscles burning with exertion, Maria thought of everything that had led her to this moment. The young nurse who had fallen in love with a charming American businessman seemed like a different person now, someone from another lifetime. She thought of the communities she had fought to protect, of the colleagues at the NBI who had become like family. She thought of Lisa, of Michael, of all the people who had believed in her and supported her. With each stroke, Maria renewed her determination. She would survive this. She would find a way back, would continue the fight against corruption and injustice. William and men like him would not win, not as long as she had breath in her body. As the yacht grew smaller behind her, as the vastness of the ocean threatened to overwhelm her, Maria kept swimming. She didn't know what lay ahead, didn't know if rescue would come or if the sea would claim her, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was Maria Santos. She was a fighter, a survivor, and no matter what happened, she would never give up. The relentless sun beat down on Maria as she floated in the vast expanse of the ocean. She had long since there was nothing but endless blue in every direction. Her muscles ached from hours of swimming, and her throat burned with thirst. Yet still, she clung to hope, refusing to give in to the despair that threatened to overwhelm her. As the day wore on, Maria's thoughts drifted to her life back in Manila. She wondered if anyone had realized she was missing yet. Would Michael and the NBI be searching for her, or had William's men managed to cover their tracks so well that no one knew she had been kidnapped? The sound of a distant engine pulled Maria from her thoughts. At first, she thought it was a hallucination, a trick of her exhausted mind. But as the sound grew louder, she turned in the water to see a small fishing boat approaching. "Hey!" she called out, her voice hoarse and weak. "Help! Over here!" The boat drew closer, and Maria could see two men peering over the side. Their eyes widened as they spotted her in the water. "Miss, are you okay?" one of the men called out. In Tagalog, "Please help me," Maria replied, using the last of her strength to swim towards the boat. The fisherman quickly pulled her aboard, wrapping her in a rough blanket and offering her water. As Maria gulped down the precious liquid, she felt tears of relief streaming down her face. "What happened to you?" one of the men asked, his face etched with concern. "Were you in a shipwreck?" Maria hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. She had no idea if these men could be trusted, or if William's influence might have reached even this small fishing boat. I fell overboard," she lied, her mind racing to create a plausible story. "From a cruise ship. I've been swimming for hours." The fisherman exchanged skeptical glances but didn't press further. "We'll take you to the nearest port," the older of the two said. "You can contact your people from there." As the boat changed course, heading towards land, Maria allowed herself to relax slightly. She was safe, for now at least. But she knew the danger was far from over. Hours later, as the sun was setting, the fishing boat pulled into a small coastal town. Maria thanked the fishermen profusely, promising to send them a reward once she was back home. They waved off her promises, simply glad to have helped. Standing on the dock, still wrapped in the scratchy blanket, Maria took in her surroundings. The town was small and quiet, with a few fishing boats bobbing in the harbor and a scattering of modest houses climbing up the hillside. She had no idea where she was, but at least she was back on land. Maria's first priority was to contact Michael and the NBI. She needed to warn them about William's plans and get herself to safety. But as she patted her pockets, she realized with a sinking heart that she had no money, no phone, nothing but the damp clothes on her back. Gathering her courage, Maria approached a small store near the dock. The elderly woman behind the counter looked up as she entered, her eyes widening at Maria's disheveled appearance. "Excuse me," Maria said in Tagalog, hoping her accent wouldn't give her away as an outsider. "I've had an accident and lost all my things. Is there a phone I could use to call my family in Manila?" The woman hesitated for a moment, then nodded, pointing to an old landline on the wall. "Make it quick," she said, not unkindly. With trembling fingers, Maria dialed Michael's number from memory. As the phone rang, she prayed he would answer, that his number hadn't changed, that he was still someone she could trust. "Hello?" Michael's familiar voice came through the line, and Maria felt her knees go weak with relief. "Michael, it's Maria," she said quickly, keeping her voice low. "I don't have much time. I was kidnapped by William. I managed to escape, but I don't know where I am, and he could be looking for me." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Michael's voice, urgent and focused. "Maria, thank God. We've been searching for you for days. Can you describe where you are?" Maria quickly relayed what little she knew about her location, describing the town and the fishing boats in the harbor. "Okay, I think I know where you are," Michael said. "Stay put. I'm sending a team to get you. It'll take a few hours, but they'll be there as fast as they can. In the meantime, find somewhere safe to hide. Don't trust anyone." As Maria hung up the phone, she felt a mix of relief and renewed fear. Help was coming, but she still had to survive for a few more hours. And if William's men were searching for her, this small town would be an easy place for them to find her. Thanking the store owner, Maria stepped back out onto the street. The sun had fully set now, and the town was quiet. Most of its residents likely settled in for the evening. She needed to find a place to hide, somewhere she wouldn't draw attention. As she walked through the narrow streets, Maria's mind raced with possibilities. She could try to find a church and offer her sanctuary, or perhaps there was a 24-hour business where she could blend in with other customers. A flash of headlights coming around a corner sent Maria ducking into a narrow alley. Her heart pounded as a sleek black SUV drove slowly past, so out of place in this small fishing town. Were William's men already here? Maria pressed herself against the rough wall of the alley, hardly daring to breathe until the sound of the engine faded into the distance. She couldn't stay here in the open. She needed a better hiding place, and fast. An idea struck her as she peered out of the alley. Across the street was a small inn, its windows dark except for a faint light in the lobby. If she could somehow get a room without any money, she could hide there until Michael's team arrived. Taking a deep breath, Maria crossed the street and entered the inn. A young man sat behind the desk, looking bored as he scrolled through his phone. "Excuse me," Maria said, trying to keep her voice steady. I need a room for the night." The man looked up, his eyes widening as he took in her appearance. "Miss, are you okay? You look like you've been in an accident." Maria nodded, seizing on the explanation. "Yes, I was on a boat that capsized. I lost everything. Please, I just need a place to rest for a few hours until my family can come get me." The young man hesitated, clearly torn between sympathy and the rules of his job. "I'm not supposed to give out rooms without payment," he said slowly. "Please," Maria pleaded, allowing some of her genuine fear to show in her voice. "I'm in trouble. I just need somewhere safe to wait. I promise my family will pay for the room when they arrive." Something in her tone must have convinced him, because after a long moment, the young man nodded. "Okay," he said, reaching for a key. "Room 5, at the end of the hall. But if your family doesn't show up to pay by morning, I'll have to call the police." Maria thanked him profusely, taking the key with shaking hands. As she made her way down the hallway, she sent up a silent prayer prayer of thanks for the young man's kindness. The room was small and sparsely furnished, but to Maria it looked like paradise. She locked the door behind her, then pushed a heavy dresser in front of it for good measure. Only then did she allow herself to sink onto the bed, the events of the past few days crashing over her like a wave. She was alive. She had escaped William, had swum for hours in the open ocean, had found her way to safety against all odds. Tears of exhaustion and relief streamed down her face as the realization hit her. She had survived. But even as she allowed herself this moment of relief, Maria knew the danger wasn't over. William was still out there, still free, still intent on rebuilding his criminal empire. And now he would be angry, out for revenge against the woman who had defied him once again. As she lay on the bed, every sound from outside making her tense, Maria's mind raced with plans. She couldn't go back to her old life, couldn't return to her work at the NBI as if nothing had happened. William had proven that he could get to her anywhere, could infiltrate even the most secure locations. No, she needed a new plan, a way to bring William down once and for all. She had evidence, knowledge of his operations that she had gathered during her time in captivity. If she could just get that information to the right people, she might be able to stop him for good. The hours crawled by, each minute feeling like an eternity as Maria waited for Michael's team to arrive. Every car that passed on the street outside made her heart race, wondering if it was her rescuers or William's men coming to recapture her. Finally, just as the first light of dawn was beginning to creep through the window, Maria heard a commotion in the hallway. There was a knock at her door, followed by a familiar voice. "Maria, it's Michael. We're here to get you out." Relief flooded through her as she pushed the dresser away from the door and unlocked it. Michael stood there, flanked by two other agents, his face a mixture of concern and relief. "Thank God you're safe," he said, pulling her into a quick embrace. "Come on, we need to move quickly. We don't know if Fairfax's men are in the area." As they hurried out of the inn and into a waiting car, Maria filled Michael in on everything that had happened. His face grew grim as she described William's plans to rebuild his operation, the extent of his network that she had uncovered during her captivity. "This is bigger than we thought," Michael said as the car sped towards Manila. "We're going to need to completely overhaul our approach. And you, Maria, you're going to need round-the-clock protection." Maria shook her head. "No, Michael, I can't go back to living in fear, always looking over my shoulder. We need to end this once and for all." "What are you suggesting?" Michael asked, his brow furrowed. The plan she had been forming during those long hours in the inn room finally taking shape. "We need to draw William out, force him into the open where he can't hide behind his network of corrupt officials and businessmen." "And how do we do that?" Michael asked, leaning forward with interest. "We use me as bait," Maria said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "We let it be known that I'm willing to make a deal to trade my silence and cooperation for immunity. William won't be able to resist the opportunity to silence me for good." Michael's eyes widened. "That's incredibly dangerous, Maria. We can't guarantee your safety in an operation like that." "It's a risk we have to take," Maria insisted. "It's the only way to draw him out, to catch him red-handed where he can't wriggle out of it with expensive lawyers and paid-off judges." As they argued back and forth, refining the plan, Maria felt a sense of purpose settling over her. This was it, the final confrontation with William. One way or another, it would end here. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Maria worked closely with Michael and a select team of trusted NBI agents, planning every detail of the operation. They chose their location carefully, a luxury resort on a private island that could be easily monitored and controlled. Word was leaked through carefully chosen channels that Maria Santos, the whistleblower who had brought down William Fairfax's empire, was willing to make a deal. The bait was set, and now all they could do was wait. As the day of the meeting approached, Maria found herself oscillating between determination and fear. She knew the risks, knew that if anything went wrong, she could end up back in William's clutches or worse. But she also knew that this was their best chance to bring him down for good, to end the cycle of corruption and exploitation that had caused so much suffering. The morning of the meeting dawned clear and bright. Maria stood on the balcony of her hotel room, looking out over the crystal-clear waters of the Philippine Sea. She took a deep breath, centering herself for what was to come. A knock at the door signaled that it was time. Michael entered, his face serious, as he helped Maria with her wire and went over the plan one last time. "Remember," he said, his hands on her shoulders, "we'll be monitoring everything. At the first sign of trouble, give the signal and and we'll move in. Don't try to be a hero, Maria. Your safety is the priority here." Maria nodded, grateful for Michael's concern, but knowing in her heart that she would do whatever it took to see this through. As they made their way to the resort's private beach, where the meeting was set to take place, Maria felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. She took her place at a table under a palm tree, the picture of relaxed luxury in her flowing sundress and wide-brimmed hat, and then she waited, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of William's approach. The sound of a boat engine drew her attention, and Maria's heart began to race as a sleek yacht appeared around the curve of the island. This was it. The final confrontation was about to begin. As the yacht drew closer, Maria could make out a figure standing at the bow. Even at this distance, she would recognize William anywhere. Their eyes met across the water, and Maria felt a shiver run down her spine. In that moment, she knew that no matter what happened next, her life would never be the same. The yacht glided smoothly towards the shore, its pristine white hull gleaming in the tropical sun. Maria watched, her heart pounding, as William disembarked onto the soft sand. He was flanked by two burly men, their bulging jackets leaving little doubt that they were armed. William himself looked impeccable in a light linen suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. If the years in prison had taken a toll on him, it wasn't visible in his outward appearance. As William approached the table, Maria forced herself to remain seated, to appear calm and collected despite the turmoil of emotions roiling within her. She reminded herself that she was in control here, that this entire scenario was of her making. "Maria," William said, his voice smooth as silk as he took the seat across from her, "you're looking well. I must say, I was surprised to receive your message. I thought our last encounter had made your feelings quite clear." Maria met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "Circumstances change, William. I've had time to reconsider my position." William's eyebrow arched skeptically. "Have you now? And what, pray tell, has brought about this change of heart?" "Reality," Maria replied, infusing her voice with a hint of bitterness. "I've spent the last 2 years fighting a losing battle against corruption. For every official we bring down, 2 more pop up to take their place. I'm tired, William, tired of fighting a war I can't win." William's face a predator sensing weakness in its prey. "Ah, my dear, I always knew you'd come to see things my way eventually. The world isn't black and white, is it? Sometimes, to effect real change, one must be willing to get one's hands a little dirty." Maria nodded, allowing a flicker of uncertainty to show on her face. "I've realized that now, but I need assurances, William. If I'm going to switch sides, I need to know I'll be protected." William leaned back in his chair, studying her intently. "And what exactly are you offering in exchange for this protection?" "Everything," Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My knowledge of the NBI's operations, the evidence I've gathered against your former associates, my public support for your new ventures. I can help you rebuild everything you lost, bigger and better than before." For a long moment, William was silent, his eyes never leaving Maria's face. She held her breath, praying that her performance was convincing, that he couldn't see through her ruse. Finally, William spoke. "It's an intriguing offer, Maria, but you must understand my hesitation. You've betrayed me before. How can I trust that this isn't some elaborate trap?" Maria had been prepared for this question. She reached into her bag, pulling out a USB drive. "This contains sensitive information about ongoing NBI investigations, including operations against some of your known associates. Consider it a gesture of good faith." William's eyes gleamed with interest as he reached for the drive, but Maria pulled it back slightly. She said, a hint of her old defiance creeping into her voice. "Not until we have a deal. I need your word, William, your protection, a place in your new organization, and a guarantee that you'll leave my family and friends alone." William chuckled, a sound that sent chills down Maria's spine despite the tropical heat. "Always the negotiator, aren't you, my dear? Very well, you have my word. Once I've verified the information on that drive, we'll draw up a more formal agreement. But for now, consider yourself under my protection." As William reached for the USB drive, Maria felt a moment of triumph. He had taken the bait. Now they just needed to reel him in. But before their fingers could touch, a commotion from the direction of William's yacht caught their attention. Shouts rang out, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. William was on his feet in an instant, his face contorting with rage as he realized he'd been tricked. "You little bitch," he snarled, lunging across across the table at Maria. Maria dove to the side, narrowly avoiding William's grasp. She rolled in the sand, her heart racing as she heard Michael's voice shouting orders. The beach erupted into chaos as NBI agents swarmed from their hidden positions, engaging in a firefight with William's men. Through the mayhem, Maria caught sight of William making a break for it, running down the beach towards a small cove where a speedboat was moored. Without thinking, she took off after him. She couldn't let him escape, not when they were so close to ending this once and for all. "Maria! Stop!" she heard Michael yell, but she ignored him, her focus solely on the man running ahead of her. William reached the speedboat, fumbling with the keys as he tried to start the engine. Maria was only steps behind him, her lungs burning as she pushed herself to run faster. Just as the boat's engine roared to life, Maria made a desperate leap, landing heavily in the back of the vessel as it began to pull away from the shore. William spun around, his eyes wide with surprise and fury. "Are you crazy?" he shouted over the noise of the engine and the waves. "Do you have a death wish?" Maria pulled herself up, facing William with determination blazing in her eyes. "It's over, William. There's nowhere left for you to run." William's face twisted into a sneer. "It's never over, Maria. There will always be people like me, people who understand how the world really works. You can't stop us all." "Maybe not," Maria replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But I can stop you." As the boat sped further from the shore, Maria could see more NBI vessels giving chase, but they were too far behind. It was just her and William now, facing off as the small boat bounced over the waves. William lunged at her suddenly, his hands grasping for her throat. Maria ducked, using his momentum to throw him off balance. They grappled in the confined space of the boat, each fighting for control. Maria's foot slipped on the wet floor of the boat, and William seized the advantage. He pinned her against the side of the vessel, his face inches from hers, contorted with rage. "You've been a thorn in my side for far too long, Maria," he growled. "It's time to end this." As William's hands tightened around her throat, Maria felt a surge of desperation. She couldn't let it end like this, not after everything she'd been through. She brought her knee up sharply, catching William in the groin. He doubled over in pain, loosening his grip just enough for Maria to break free. She gasped for air, her vision swimming as she tried to regain her footing. In the rocking boat, William recovered quickly, his eyes wild with fury as he charged at her again. But this time, Maria was ready. As he reached for her, she sidestepped, using his momentum to send him stumbling past her. William's foot caught on the edge of a seat, and he went sprawling. His head struck the side of the boat with a sickening crack, and he crumpled to the floor, motionless. For a moment, Maria stood frozen, her chest heaving as she tried to process what had just happened. Then, training kicking in, she dropped to her knees beside William, checking for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. William was unconscious but alive. Maria let out a shaky breath, relief and exhaustion washing over her in equal measure. The sound of approaching engines snapped her back to reality. The NBI boats had caught up, and she could see Michael standing at the bow of the lead vessel, his face a mask of concern. As the NBI agents swarmed the speedboat, securing William and checking on Maria, she felt a strange sense of unreality. Was it really over? After all this time, all the fear and struggle, had they finally brought William Fairfax to justice? Maria sat numbly as a medic checked her over, barely hearing the concerned questions and congratulations from the agents. Around her, her eyes remained fixed on William's unconscious form as he was carefully transferred to one of the NBI boats. It wasn't until they were back on the shore, the beach now swarming with law enforcement and medical personnel, that the full impact of what had happened hit her. Maria's knees buckled, and she would have fallen if Michael hadn't caught her arm. "Easy there," he said gently, guiding her to sit on a nearby rock. "You've been through hell, Maria, but it's over now. We got him. Thanks to you, William Fairfax is going back to prison, and this time he's not getting out." Maria nodded, tears suddenly streaming down her face as the tension of the past weeks, months, years finally released. She had done it. She had faced her fears, had confronted the man who had once held such power over her, and she had won. As the sun began to set over the Philippine Sea, painting the sky in in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Maria felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The long nightmare that had begun with her whirlwind romance with William Fairfax was finally truly over. In the days that followed, Maria found herself at the center of a media storm. The dramatic takedown of William Fairfax International, fugitive and mastermind of a vast criminal empire, was front-page news around the world. Maria's role in his capture, her journey from naive nurse to determined whistleblower to undercover operative, captured the public's imagination. But even as she sat for interviews and testified at hearings, Maria felt strangely detached from it all. The woman at the center of these stories, the brave heroine who had risked everything to bring a criminal to justice, felt like a character in a movie rather than her real self. It was during a quiet moment, sitting in her old apartment in Manila, for the first time in what felt like years, that Maria finally allowed herself to truly process everything that had happened. She looked around at the familiar surroundings, at the life she had left behind when she first fell for William's charm, and felt a profound sense of coming full circle. A knock at the door roused her from her reflections. She opened it to find Lisa Chen standing there, a warm smile on her face and a bottle of wine in her hand. "I thought you could use a drink," Lisa said, holding up the bottle, "and maybe a friend to talk to who understands what you've been through." Maria felt a rush of gratitude as she ushered Lisa in. As they settled on the couch, glasses of wine in hand, Maria found herself opening up, sharing the fears and doubts she had kept bottled up for so long. "I keep waiting for it to feel real," she confessed, staring into her glass, "for it to feel like it's truly over. But part of me is still waiting for the other shoe to drop, you know, for William to somehow wriggle out of it again, or for some new threat to emerge." Lisa nodded, understanding. "That's normal, Maria. You've been living in a state of high alert for so long. It's going to take time for your mind and body to accept that the danger has passed, but it has passed. William is going away for a very long time, and his network has been dismantled. You're safe now." Maria took a sip of her wine, letting Lisa's words sink in. "So what do I do now?" she asked, voicing the question that had been nagging at her. "How do I just go back to normal life after everything that's happened?" Lisa leaned forward, her eyes normal life. "Maria, you've done something extraordinary. You've exposed corruption. You've brought down a criminal empire. You've made a real difference in the world. Why stop now?" Maria blinked, surprised by Lisa's words. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you have a unique perspective now. You've seen how corruption works from the inside, and you've proven that one person really can make a difference. There are organizations out there that could use someone like you, someone with your experience and your courage." As Lisa began to outline possibilities, NGOs and international organizations working to fight corruption and protect whistleblowers, Maria felt a spark of excitement ignite within her. This was it, she realized. This was the purpose she had been searching for, the way to turn all the pain and struggle she had endured into something positive. Over the next few months, Maria threw herself into this new chapter of her life with the same determination that had carried her through her darkest moments. She worked with international anti-corruption organizations, sharing her experiences and helping to develop new strategies to combat corporate greed and government malfeasance. She traveled the world, speaking at conferences and universities, inspiring others to stand up against injustice. And everywhere she went, she carried with her the lessons she had learned, the strength she had found within herself during her long battle against William Fairfax. 1 year to the day after William's capture, Maria found herself back on that same beach where their final confrontation had taken place. The resort was closed now. The island turned into a training center for the NBI's anti-corruption unit. As she stood at the water's edge, watching the sun sink towards the horizon, Maria felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. She thought of the naive young nurse she had once been, of the terrified whistleblower she had become, of the fighter she was now. The journey had been long and painful, filled with moments of doubt and fear. But standing here now, Maria knew that she wouldn't change a thing. Every step of that journey had brought her to this moment, had shaped her into the woman she was now. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Maria made a silent vow to herself. She would continue to fight, to speak out against injustice wherever she found it. She would use her voice and her experiences to make the world a little bit better, one small victory at a time. The sun dipped below the horizon, and Maria turned to walk back up the beach. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. But for the first time in a long time, Maria Maria Santos wasn't afraid. She was ready, stronger, and more determined than ever before. As she reached the edge of the beach, Maria paused, taking one last look at the darkening sea. The chapter of her life dominated by William Fairfax was finally truly closed, but her story, she realized with a smile, was far from over. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. 5 years had passed since the dramatic capture of William. Fairfax and Maria Santos found herself standing at a podium in Geneva, addressing a room full of international delegates at a United Nations conference on anti-corruption measures. Her voice was steady and confident as she spoke, a far cry from the terrified whistleblower she had once been. "Corruption is not just a crime," she said, her eyes scanning the attentive faces before her. "It's a cancer that eats away at the very foundations of our societies. It destroys lives, undermines democracies, and perpetuates cycles of poverty and injustice. But I'm here today to tell you that we are not powerless against it. Each one of us has the ability to make a difference, to stand up and say no more." As she continued her speech, outlining new strategies for combating global corruption, Maria felt a sense of pride and purpose that still sometimes surprised her. In the years since William's arrest, she had transformed her pain and trauma into a powerful force for change, becoming a respected voice in the international anti-corruption community. After the conference, as Maria was gathering her notes, she was approached by a young woman with bright, eager eyes. "Ms. Santos," the woman said, her voice tinged with awe, "I just wanted to thank you. Your story, your work, it's what inspired me to get into this field. You've made such a difference." Maria smiled warmly, touched by the young woman's words. "Thank you," she replied, "but remember, the power to make a difference lies within all of us. I'm just one voice among many." As she made her way out of the conference center, Maria's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Michael, her old colleague at the NBI, now a close friend and occasional collaborator in her international work. "Turn on the news," the message read. "You're going to Maria hurried back to her hotel room and switched on the television. Her heart nearly stopped as she saw the breaking news banner scrolling across the screen. "William Fairfax found dead in prison cell." The news anchor's voice faded into background noise as Maria sank onto the bed, her mind reeling. William was dead. The man who had once been her husband, who had betrayed her trust and exploited her homeland, who had haunted her nightmares for years, was gone. Maria's phone rang, startling her out of her shock. It was Michael. "Did you see?" he asked as soon as she answered. "I saw," Maria replied, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "What happened?" "Apparent heart attack," Michael said. "But there will be an investigation, of course." "Maria, are you okay?" Maria took a deep breath, trying to sort through the tumult of emotions swirling within her. I don't know," she admitted. "It's a lot to process. Do you want me to come?" "To Geneva?" Michael asked, concern evident in his voice. "I can be on the next flight." Maria shook her head, then remembered Michael couldn't see her. No, that's not necessary. I'll be fine. I just need some time to think." After hanging up, Maria stood and walked to the window, looking out over the twinkling lights of Geneva. She had thought this chapter of her life was closed, that she had moved on from William and everything he represented. But his death had reopened old wounds, stirring up memories and emotions she thought she had long since put to rest. As the initial shock wore off, Maria found herself reflecting on the long, twisted path that had led her to this moment. She thought of the young nurse she had been, so full of hope and naivety, falling for William's charm and promises of a better life. She remembered the growing unease as she discovered the truth about his business dealings, the terror and determination that had driven her to become a whistleblower, the years of fear and hiding, the constant threat hanging over her head, the final confrontation on that beach in the Philippines. All of it played through her mind like scenes from a movie, and now, with William's death, it felt like the credits were finally rolling on that particular story. But as Maria continued to gaze out at the city, she realized that William's death didn't change anything, not really. The work she was doing, the fight against corruption and injustice, it was bigger than just one man. William might be gone, but there were countless others like him out there, exploiting the vulnerable and twisting the system to their advantage. With that thought, a new sense of purpose settled over Maria. She turned away from the window and picked up her phone, dialing a familiar number. "Lisa," she said, when her friend and sometimes collaborator answered, "I need your help with something. I think it's time we told the whole story." Over the next few months, Maria worked closely with Lisa to write a book detailing her experiences. It was a painful process, process at times, forcing Maria to relive some of the darkest moments of her life. But it was also cathartic, allowing her to process her emotions and experiences in a way she never had before. The book, titled Breaking the Silence, One Woman's Fight Against Global Corruption, was published to critical acclaim. It quickly became a bestseller, its raw honesty and insider's perspective on corporate corruption striking a chord with readers around the world. Maria found herself thrust back into the spotlight, doing interviews and book signings, sharing her story with a whole new audience. But this time, it felt different. She was no longer the scared whistleblower or the determined undercover agent. She was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had faced her demons and come out stronger. At one particularly packed book signing in New York, a city that held so many conflicting memories for her, Maria was approached by a familiar face. It was Frank, the ex-military man who had protected her during her time in witness protection. "Miss Santos," he said, a rare smile crossing his usually stern face. "Or should I say, Ms. Rivera, I never got to tell you how impressed I was with what you did. You're one hell of a fighter." Maria felt a rush of warmth at the unexpected praise. "Thank you, Frank. I couldn't have done it without people like you watching my back." As Frank moved away, Maria noticed a young woman hesitating at the end of the line. She looked nervous, clutching a copy of the book to her chest like a shield. When she finally reached the table, her hands were shaking as she placed the book in front of Maria. "Ms. Santos," the young woman said, her voice barely above a whisper, I just wanted to thank you. I'm in a situation with my company. I've seen things, illegal things, and I didn't know what to do. But your book, it gave me courage. I'm going to speak out." Maria felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at the young woman. In those frightened but determined eyes, she reached out and squeezed the woman's hand. "You're incredibly brave," Maria said softly, "and you're not alone. Here's my card. If you need any help or advice, don't hesitate to contact me." As the young woman walked away, clutching Maria's card like a lifeline, Maria felt a renewed sense of purpose wash over her. This was why she had written the book, why she continued to share her story. If she could inspire others to stand up against corruption, to fight for what was right, then everything she had been through would be worth it. The book tour took Maria around the world, from bustling metropolises to small towns she had never heard of. Everywhere she went, she was touched by the stories people shared with her. Tales of small acts of resistance against corrupt systems, of individuals standing up for what was right, despite the personal cost. It was during a stop in Manila, the city where her journey had begun, that Maria had a revelation. As she looked out at the familiar skyline from her hotel room, she realized that while her book had been cathartic and inspiring, it wasn't enough. There were so many others out there, whistleblowers and activists fighting against corruption, who needed support and protection. The idea came to her fully formed, as if it had been waiting in the back of her mind all along. She would start a foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting and protecting whistleblowers around the world. It would provide legal aid, financial support, and a network of resources for those brave enough to speak out against corruption. Energized by this new purpose, Maria threw herself into making her vision a reality. She reached out to her contacts in the anti-corruption world, to lawyers and activists and fellow whistleblowers. The response was overwhelming, with offers of support and collaboration pouring in from around the globe. Within months, the Fairfax Foundation for Truth and Transparency was born. Maria had chosen the name deliberately, reclaiming her former married name and transforming it from a symbol of corruption into a beacon of hope for whistleblowers everywhere. The foundation's first major case came just weeks after its official launch. A group of workers in a Southeast Asian garment factory had evidence of dangerous working conditions and illegal labor practices, but faced threats and intimidation when they tried to speak out. The Fairfax Foundation stepped in, providing legal representation and safe housing for the whistleblowers and their families. As Maria watched the case unfold, culminating in improved conditions for thousands of workers and criminal charges for the factory owners, she felt a sense of satisfaction unlike anything she she had experienced before. This was what she had been working towards all along, turning her own painful experiences into a force for positive change in the world. The years that followed were busy ones for Maria and the Fairfax Foundation. They took on cases big and small, from corporate whistleblowers exposing financial fraud to government employees revealing political corruption. The foundation's reputation grew, becoming known as a powerful ally for those brave enough to speak truth to power. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The foundation's work made powerful enemies, and Maria often found herself the target of smear campaigns and legal threats. There were times when the pressure felt overwhelming, when she questioned whether she had the strength to continue. It was during one of these low moments, after a particularly vicious attack in the press, that Maria received an unexpected visitor. She was working late in her office when there was a knock at the door. To her surprise, it was Lena, her old friend from her nursing days in Manila. "Lena?" Maria exclaimed, rising to embrace her friend. "What are you doing here?" Lena smiled, returning the hug warmly. "I saw the news, the things they're saying about you and the foundation. I thought you could use a friendly face." As they settled onto the couch in Maria's office, catching up over cups of coffee, Maria felt some of the tension of the past weeks begin to ease. Lena had known her before all of this, before William and the whistleblowing and the foundation. She was a connection to a simpler time, a reminder of the person Maria had been. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you hadn't met William?" Lena asked softly. "If you had just stayed in Manila, continued nursing?" Maria was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Sometimes," she admitted, "there are days when I miss the simplicity of that life. But then I think of all the people we've helped, all the corruption we've exposed, and I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Lena nodded, reaching out to squeeze Maria's hand. "You've always had a big heart, Maria. Even back then, you were always looking for ways to help." As Lena left that evening, Maria felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path she had chosen wasn't an easy one, but it was the right one for her. She was making a difference, living up to the potential that Lena had seen in her all those years ago. The next morning, Maria arrived at the office with a fresh determination. She gathered her team, the dedicated group of lawyers, researchers, and activists who had become like family over the years. "I know things have been tough lately," she said, looking around at their tired but resolute faces, "but I want you all to remember why we're doing this. Every case we take on, every whistleblower we support, we're changing lives. We're fighting for a world where the truth matters, where those in power are held accountable. It's not an easy fight, but it's one worth having." As her team nodded in agreement, their eyes lighting up with renewed energy, Maria felt a surge of pride. This was her legacy, not the scandal and pain of her past, but this group of dedicated individuals working tirelessly to make the world a little bit better. In the years that followed, the Fairfax Foundation continued to grow and evolve. They expanded their reach, setting up offices in strategic locations around the world. They developed new technologies to protect whistleblowers' identities, worked with governments to strengthen protection laws, and continued to support those brave enough to speak out against corruption. And through it all, Maria remained at the helm, her experiences shaping her into a leader who understood both the personal cost and the vital importance of exposing the truth. She had come a long way from the young nurse who had fallen for William Fairfax's charm, but in many ways she was still the same Maria Santos, driven by a deep-seated desire to help others and fight against injustice. As she stood at the window of her office one evening, looking out over the Manila skyline, Maria reflected on the long, winding journey that had brought her to this point. The pain, the fear, the triumphs and setbacks, all of it had shaped her into the woman she was today. She thought of William, of the life she had once thought she wanted, and felt a moment of sadness for the young, naive woman she had been. But that sadness was quickly replaced by a sense of gratitude. Without those experiences, without the hardships she had faced, she might never have found her true calling. The sun was setting over Manila Bay, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, much like it had on that beach years ago when she had finally confronted William. But this time, as Maria watched the day fade into night, she felt no fear, no uncertainty. She knew exactly who she was and what she was meant to do. Maria Santos, once a simple simple nurse from Manila, had become a beacon of hope for whistleblowers and anti-corruption activists around the world. Her story, her foundation, her ongoing fight against injustice, all of it served as a powerful reminder that one person really could make a difference. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, Maria turned away from the window, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. She had fought her way out of the darkness, had turned her pain into purpose, and she would continue to fight, continue to inspire others to speak out against corruption and injustice. The battle was far from over, but Maria Santos was ready. She had found her voice, her strength, her purpose, and she would use them all to keep pushing for a more just and transparent world. One case, one whistleblower, one small victory at a time. The Fairfax Foundation for Truth and Transparency had just celebrated its 10th anniversary when Maria Santos received a call that would change everything. She was in her office, reviewing reports from their latest case, when her assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Santos, there's a call for you on line 1. They say it's urgent." Maria picked up the phone, her brow furrowing at the unfamiliar voice on the other end. "Ms. Santos, my name is Agent Sarah Thompson with the FBI. We need to speak with you immediately regarding a matter of national security." A chill ran down Maria's spine. In her years of work with whistleblowers and anti-corruption efforts, she had dealt with law enforcement agencies before, but never like this. "What's this about, Agent Thompson?" "I'm afraid I can't discuss details over the phone, Ms. Santos. We need you to come in person to our field office in Manila, today, if possible." Maria's mind raced. What could be so urgent? Was this related to one of the Foundation's cases? Or was it something from her past? Something to do with William Fairfax? "I'll be there in an hour," Maria said, her voice steady despite the anxiety churning in her stomach as she made her way through the bustling streets of Manila to the FBI. Field office? Maria couldn't shake the feeling that faced countless challenges in her life, had stared down corrupt businessmen and politicians, had even confronted her ex-husband in a life-or-death struggle. But something about this situation felt different, more ominous. The FBI office was a nondescript building, its bland exterior belying the important work that went on inside. Maria was ushered through security and led to a conference room where Agent Thompson was waiting, along with 2 other agents she didn't recognize. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Ms. Santos," Agent Thompson said, gesturing for Maria to take a seat. "We have a situation that we believe you're uniquely qualified to assist with." Maria sat, her posture straight, her face a mask of calm professionalism. "I'm listening." Agent Thompson placed a file on the table, sliding it towards Maria. "What do you know about Global Corp Industries?" Maria's eyebrows rose. Global Corp was one of the largest multinational corporations in the world, with interests in everything from pharmaceuticals to aerospace. They're a major player in various industries, known for aggressive expansion and acquisition strategies. There have been rumors of unethical practices, but nothing concrete has ever been proven. Agent Thompson nodded. "Those rumors are about to become very real, Ms. Santos. We've received intelligence that Global Corp is involved in a massive global corruption scheme. Money laundering, bribery of government officials, environmental violations on a scale we've never seen before." Maria leaned forward, her interest piqued. "And you're coming to me because..." "Because," Agent Thompson said, her voice grave, "the evidence suggests that Global Corp's operation makes William Fairfax's empire look like child's play in comparison, and because we have reason to believe they're targeting you and your foundation." Maria felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. "Targeting us? How?" Agent Thompson opened the file, revealing photographs and documents. "Global Corp has been systematically undermining whistleblower protection laws around the world. They've been lobbying governments, pressuring politicians, and we believe they're behind a recent series of smear campaigns against prominent anti-corruption organizations, including yours." Maria's mind raced as she processed this information. The Fairfax Foundation had indeed been facing increased challenges lately, with funding sources drying up and public opinion turning against them in certain countries, but she had never imagined it was part of a coordinated attack. "What do you need from me?" Maria asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil turmoil of emotions inside her. "We need your help to bring them down," Agent Thompson replied. "Your experience, your connections in the anti-corruption world, and most importantly, your willingness to take on powerful enemies. We want you to go undercover, Ms. Santos, to infiltrate Global Corp and help us gather the evidence we need to dismantle their entire operation." Maria sat back, stunned. Go undercover at her age with her high profile? It seemed impossible, and yet a part of her, the part that had never stopped fighting against corruption and injustice, thrilled at the challenge. "This won't be like your previous undercover work, Ms. Santos," one of the other agents spoke up. "This is a long-term, deep cover operation. You'd have to leave your life behind, possibly for years. The danger would be immense." Maria nodded, understanding the gravity of what they were asking. "And if I refuse?" Agent Thompson's face was grim. "Then we continue our investigation without you. But I won't lie to you, Ms. Santos. Without someone on the inside, someone with your experience and skills, our chances of success drop significantly, and Global Corp will continue to operate with impunity, destroying lives and corrupting governments around the world." Maria stood, walking to the window that overlooked the Manila skyline. She thought of the life she had built, the foundation she had created, the difference she had made. Could she really walk away from all of that? But then she thought of why she had started this journey in the first place. It had never been about personal glory or recognition. It had always been about fighting injustice, about giving a voice to those who had been silenced. And here was an opportunity to do that on a scale she had never imagined. She turned back to the agents, her decision made. "I'll do it, but I have conditions." Over the next few weeks, Maria worked closely with the FBI and other international law enforcement agencies to prepare for her undercover mission. A new identity was crafted for her, a background established that would make her an attractive hire for Global Corp. Maria Santos, crusading anti-corruption activist, ceased to exist. In her place was Miranda Reyes, a brilliant but morally flexible corporate consultant with a track record of helping companies navigate. The night before she was set to leave for her new life, Maria stood in her apartment, looking at the life she was leaving behind. Photos of friends and colleagues, awards for her anti-corruption work, mementos from a life dedicated to fighting for justice. She would have to leave it all behind. A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. It was Michael, her old friend from the NBI, now a high-ranking official in the Philippine government. "I came to say goodbye," he said, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and concern. "And to make sure you're really okay with this." Maria smiled, touched by his concern. "I have to do this, Michael. If what they're saying about Global Corp is true, this could be the biggest fight of my life. I can't walk away from that." Michael nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Just be careful, Maria. The world needs you to come back from this." As they embraced, Maria felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This was really happening. She was about to step into the unknown, to take on the biggest challenge of her life. The next morning, Maria, now Miranda, boarded a plane to New York, where she would begin her new life as a corporate consultant. As the plane took off, she watched Manila disappear beneath the clouds, wondering when or if she would ever see it again. Months passed as Miranda established herself in the cutthroat world of corporate consulting. She built a reputation for being brilliant, ruthless, and discreet, exactly the kind of person a company like Global Corp would want on their team. Finally, after nearly a year of careful maneuvering, Miranda received the call she had been waiting for. Global Corp wanted to hire her for a special project, one that required her unique set of skills. As she walked into Global Corp's towering headquarters in Manhattan, Miranda felt a familiar mix of excitement and fear. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for. Everything she had done, every sacrifice she had made, had led to this. The elevator ride to the executive floor seemed to take an eternity. Miranda used the time to center herself, to fully embrace the persona she had crafted. She was no longer Maria Santos, crusader for justice. She was Miranda Reyes, corporate fixer, ready to do whatever it took to get the job done. The doors opened, revealing a sleek, modern office space. A tall, imposing man in an impeccable suit was waiting for her. "Ms. Reyes," he said, extending his hand, "I'm Victor Hawthorne, CEO of Global Corp. Welcome to the team." As Miranda shook his hand, she felt a chill run down her spine. She was now in the belly of the beast, surrounded by the very people she had spent her life fighting against. The real work was about to begin. Over the next few months, Miranda threw herself into her role at Global Global Corp. She worked long hours, attended high-level meetings, and slowly but surely began to gain the trust of the company's top executives. It was grueling, mentally and emotionally exhausting work. Every day, Miranda had to listen to plans that would destroy lives and corrupt governments, had to pretend to approve of and even contribute to these schemes. There were nights when she lay awake, questioning whether she was doing the right thing, whether the end truly justified the means. But then she would remember the bigger picture, the lives that were at stake, the systemic corruption that needed to be exposed and stopped. And she would get up the next day, put on her corporate armor and dive back into the fray. Slowly but surely, Miranda began to uncover the true extent of Global Corp's corruption. It was worse than anyone had imagined. The company had its tentacles in governments around the world, was manipulating markets on a global scale, and was responsible for environmental devastation that would take generations to reverse. With each piece of evidence she managed to secretly document and pass along to her FBI handlers, Miranda felt a mix of triumph and horror. Triumph at the knowledge that she was helping to build a case that could bring down this corrupt empire. Horror at the scale of the damage Global Corp had already done. But as Miranda dug deeper, she began to sense that something wasn't right. Certain executives would clam up when she entered rooms. Conversations would stop abruptly. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. One evening, working late in her office, Miranda was startled by a knock at her door. It was Victor Hawthorne, the CEO, a man she had come to both respect for his intelligence and despise for his utter lack of moral compass. "Miranda, my dear," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I wonder if you might join me for a drink in my office. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Miranda's heart raced, but she kept her face neutral. "Of course, Mr. Hawthorne. Lead the way." As she followed him to his expansive corner office, Miranda ran through possible scenarios in her head. Was this a test, or was it something else entirely? Victor poured them each a glass of expensive scotch, then settled into his chair, studying Miranda over the rim of his glass. "You've done exceptional work for us, Miranda. Truly exceptional. In fact, I don't think we've ever had an employee quite like you." Miranda took a sip of her drink, buying time to calm her nerves. "Thank you, sir. I've certainly given Global Corp my all." Victor nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Yes, you certainly have. You know, Miranda, loyalty is something I value above all else in my employees. And you, well, you've proven your loyalty time and time again." Miranda felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in Victor's tone, something that set off alarm bells in her head. "I'm glad you feel that way, Mr. Hawthorne. Global Corp has given me an incredible opportunity, and I'm committed to seeing our projects through to the end." Victor's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm so glad to hear you say that, Miranda, because I have a very special project in mind for you, one that will require the utmost discretion and loyalty." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You see, Miranda, we've recently become aware of a threat to our operations, a group of, shall we say, misguided individuals who seem intent on exposing certain aspects of our business that are best kept private." Miranda's heart was pounding so loudly, she was sure Victor must be able to hear it. She fought to keep her voice steady. "A security breach?" Victor waved, his hand dismissively. "Nothing so crude. No, this is more of a public relations issue. These people, they think they're crusaders for justice, exposing corporate wrongdoing. What they don't understand is the delicate balance we maintain, the greater good we serve." He fixed Miranda with an intense stare. "I need someone I can trust to handle this situation, someone who understands that sometimes, for the greater good, certain sacrifices must be made. Someone like you, Miranda." In that moment, Miranda realized the true extent of the trap she had walked into. Victor wasn't just talking about silencing whistleblowers or suppressing negative press. He was talking about something much darker, much more sinister. She took another sip of her drink, buying time to think. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get out while she still could. But she knew that if she showed any hesitation now, everything she had worked for would be lost. "I'm honored by your trust, Mr. Mr. Hawthorne," she said, forcing a smile. "What exactly did you have in mind?" As Victor began to outline his plan, Miranda felt as if she were standing on the edge of a precipice. She had come to Global Corp to expose corruption, to bring down a criminal empire, but now she was being asked to become an active participant in its worst excesses. The choice she made in that moment would define not just the success or failure of her mission, but the very core of who she was as a person. As Victor spoke, Miranda knew that whatever happened next, there would be no going back. The final chapter of her story was about to unfold, and the stakes had never been higher.